Chapter 598. There were originally two films that Firefly used to compete for the Oscars this year, Interview with the Vampire and Pulp Novel. However, after the Oscar nominations were released, Eric discovered that although Night Interview with the Vampire had good industry reviews, and Firefly had made a lot of money at the box office, vampire movies and comedies were not liked by the Oscar judges. Firefly had done a lot of work for the Oscar public relations for this movie, but in the end, they only received insignificant nominations such as Best Makeup and Best Sound Effects. In the end, the heavy responsibility of Firefly's Oscars fell on Pulp Novel. Although Eric joked with Kapoor that he was likely to fall asleep during the award ceremony, the Oscars were often ridiculed for being too long. However, except for those guests who were old and tired, most people found it difficult to feel sleepy in the tense and hot atmosphere of the Oscar ceremony. Needless to say, it was quite interesting to watch this awards ceremony that was very different from the original time and space. The original Schindler's List was brought forward by a year. In addition to Pulp Novel, there were also several popular nominees this year, such as In the Name of the Father, A Piano Lover, Intersection of Lives, and so on. Moreover, Eric was surprised to find that there were two Chinese films nominated for Best Foreign Language Film this year. One was called The Wedding Banquet, and the other was called Farewell My Concubine. However, the Best Foreign Language Film award ultimately fell to Penelope's Beautiful Age. In addition, Eric also noticed Jane Campion, who was nominated for Best Director for A Piano Lover. This female director from Australia stopped at one nomination. Although he didn't know in detail, Eric also knew that there were very few women nominated for Best Director in the history of the Oscars. There shouldn't be any in the past decade. This would be a huge variable for next year's Oscar for Best Director. If Catherine was nominated for Best Director again as a woman for Saving Private Ryan, then the Oscar judges might have to consider the ethical risks of ignoring a female director for 2 consecutive years. After failing to win Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Supporting Actress consecutively, Quentin lost to Robert Altman of Intersection of Lives in the competition for Best Director. Robert Altman, who was good at shooting satirical films, had been nominated for Best Director 3 times before this. Although he lost to Steven Spielberg in the original Spacetime, this time, no one could guide this veteran director to an Oscar. When Robert Altman and the guest presenter, Clint Eastwood, left the stage, Eric, who was standing backstage, had a hunch that Pulp Fiction might only win the Best Original Screenplay award this year. However, Eric did not care about this. As long as Pulp Fiction got enough box office sales, everything would be fine. Hearing the announcer call out his name, Eric walked to the stage with the envelope containing the Best Picture results. As soon as he appeared, there was a very warm applause from the audience. Eric walked to Mike with a smile. He thought the applause would stop, but the applause did not show any signs of stopping. Instead, it became more and more enthusiastic. The Oscars was actually a party for everyone to support each other. As the host joked at an award ceremony, a group of millionaires gave out awards to each other. Eric's reputation and power in Hollywood had been growing in recent years, so it was not too surprising that he received such treatment. The applause lasted for half a minute before Eric pressed his hands together, glanced at the audience, and said with a smile, "Actually, when I received the invitation to be a guest presenter, I was very scared." Although there wasn't any obvious humor in this sentence, the audience still chuckled very cooperatively. I've always thought that such an important award should only be presented by someone who is at least 60 years old. However, the director immediately refuted me and said that I've already done everything that other people can only do when they're 80 years old. So, I came up here. With the laughter from the audience, Eric said in a serious tone, "But don't expect anything. Even if this award is given by me, the Oscar will definitely not be pure gold." The audience knew that this was Eric teasing his personal wealth, so there was another burst of laughter. Eric cleared his throat and said, "Of course, Best Picture represents an honor. It is the affirmation of the value of a film by more than 6,000 professional judges. This is definitely not something that can be replaced by money. So, let's take a look at the outstanding nominees this year." Eric gestured to the screen and walked to the side. Clips of the 5 nominated films, Pulp Fiction, Intersection of Lives, Piano Lover, In the Name of the Father, and Farewell to the Sentient Sky, appeared on the screen one by one. Eric looked at the clips of these films and was not sure who would win Best Picture this year. Compared to the relatively small number of judges for Best Director and Best Actor, Best Picture was unanimously selected by more than 6,000 judges from various judges' associations. This meant that the Best Picture award could be reflected to a certain extent in the previous Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Actress awards. If a film won more important awards, then it could be said that the Best Picture award was locked in. However, this year was a complete Oscar year. Not a single film was the big winner that everyone expected. Best Director went to Robert Altman of Intersection of Lives, Best Actor went to Daniel Day-Lewis of In the Name of the Father, Best Actress went to Holly Hunter of A Piano Lover, while Best Original Screenplay went to Pulp Fiction. The Best Supporting Actor and Actress also belonged to different films. The judges, who had the largest number of people, made completely different choices. It looked like the outcome of the best film would depend on the strength of the public relations. Although he did not know who would win, Eric was sure that after this year's Oscars, the media's comments would definitely be much more lively than before. After the introductions of the 5 films were over, Eric walked up to Mike again. He opened the envelope in his hand and glanced at the audience. His eyes quickly found a crew, and then he could not help but squint because he saw 2 familiar people around the crew. Elizabeth, who was wearing a white dress, and a fat man named Wayne Stan. Because of Eric's brief hesitation, everyone in the Los Angeles Music Hall followed Eric's gaze. Some people even whispered softly. Eric quickly came back to his senses and said, "Then, the 1993 Best Picture Oscar goes to Jane Chapman of Piano Lover." Following the applause, a short-haired woman in her 40s stood up from the crew of Piano Lover. She hugged everyone and then walked to the stage excitedly. "Congratulations, Ms. Chapman." Eric handed the golden statuette to her, politely hugged her, and then stepped aside. While Jane Chapman was giving her acceptance speech, Eric, who was standing next to her, looked down the stage again. In this era, the Best Picture Oscar crew did not rush to the stage like later years. The crew of Piano Lover was still sitting in the same place. Noticing Eric's gaze, Harvey Wayne Stan nodded politely to him. Elizabeth raised her chin a little proudly and drew the letter C in front of her with her finger. Then she clenched her fist and suddenly opened it, making a gesture of destruction. Even if Elizabeth didn't give him these hints, Eric could guess what she was trying to do. Jane Campbell's identity as a woman was both an advantage and a disadvantage. If it were not for Robert Altman, who had accumulated several Oscar nominations, Wayne Stan's ability to manipulate public opinion and award PR, coupled with the huge media support of News Corporation, perhaps Jane Campbell could really become the first female director to win the Best Director Oscar. But because of Robert Altman, Wayne Stan knew that the chances of winning the Best Director Oscar were slim, so he turned to the Best Picture Oscar and successfully promoted a female producer. This was obviously to pave the way for Braveheart next year. In this way, if Catherine was nominated for Best Director for Saving Private Ryan next year and did not win the award, the Academy would have enough reason to say that. Since they had awarded such an important award to a woman this year, the media would have no reason to accuse them of sexism. Since he had decided to support Elizabeth in his heart, and had deliberately pushed Fox to acquire Mira Mike, Eric certainly would not be angry at the girl's little scheme. Anyway, regardless of whether Braveheart or Saving Private Ryan would be the big winner next year, in Eric's view, it was just a matter of left and right hand. Otherwise, Eric would not have delayed the production of Forrest Private Ryan by a year. What's more, compared to Saving Private Ryan, Braveheart obviously needed more awards to recover more profits. Eric had planned to go back and rest immediately after the award ceremony, but when he thought of Tom Hanks, who was also attending the award ceremony for Forrest Private Ryan, he decided to talk to Hanks about it first. He left the Los Angeles Music Center with the crowd and went to the Vanity Fair Oscar banquet at the Hilton Hotel. Although Eric had changed the history of Hollywood, the Vanity Fair party still happened on time. It was just that Eric had not been able to attend in the past few years. In the lively party hall, Eric and Hanks went to a quiet corner together and briefly introduced the plot of Forrest Private Ryan to Hanks. Hanks listened attentively to Eric's analysis of the plot, nodded, and said, "Eric, since it's the script you like, of course, there's no problem. I'll ask my agent to turn down those invitations tomorrow." "Well, this story sounds very interesting. Maybe I should read the original. Eric quickly shook his head and said, "The original story is a somewhat absurd satirical novel. I don't recommend you read it before you see the script, because I intend to adapt it into an inspirational film that shows the history of the United States from the 50s to the 70s. The protagonist, Forrest Private Ryan, represents a simple and sincere attitude towards life. If you read the original in advance, it may have a bad impact on your character. People's first impressions are very biased." "Well, when will the film start production?" "Just let me know." Hanks nodded with a smile and agreed. As for the salary and other things, of course, he didn't need to negotiate with Eric personally. These things were usually left to the producer and Hank's agent to negotiate. The two chatted casually for a while and then separated. Eric greeted some acquaintances and casually dealt with a few guests who came up to talk to him. When he saw the figures of Penelope and Kate, he planned to secretly leave the party with the two women in advance. However, just as he was about to walk towards the two women, Elizabeth led a group of people from the Piano Lover crew over. "Eric, this is Ms. Jane Campion and Ms. Jane Chapman." Eric smiled and shook hands with them one by one. Everyone knew the relationship between Elizabeth and Eric. After greeting each other and getting familiar with each other, they dispersed. After the crowd dispersed, Elizabeth asked, "Why did you ignore me? Are you really angry?" Eric said with a smile, "Seeing you surrounded by a group of people, I was afraid that I would block your light." Elizabeth snorted softly, but when she realized that Eric didn't mean to be angry, she was relieved and asked, "What were you talking about with Tom Hanks just now?" "A movie. I planned to let him be the male lead, so I told him in advance." Eric didn't mean to take credit for delaying the production of Forrest Private Ryan, and simply said. When he noticed that Penelope and Kate were looking at him, he gestured to the two women, indicating that they should wait for him outside. Elizabeth followed Eric's gaze and just noticed the backs of the two women leaving. She mocked in a sour tone, "Those two seem to be the female leads of Whopper Girls. Why didn't you get the three girls on the bed together?" Eric smiled and said, "I was too busy, so I only got two. I'll take my time with the other one. Stop messing around." Elizabeth gently kicked Eric's leg to show her dissatisfaction. Then, she remembered something and said, "You said that you were going to help Julia prepare the script. When are you going to take it out?" "At least wait until the matter in New York is over." Eric casually placed the goblet in his hand on the tray of a passing waiter, leaned over slightly, and kissed Elizabeth on the cheek. He whispered, "If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. I haven't had a good sleep for a whole week." Elizabeth shrunk her neck. She really had something important to talk to Eric about, but the two were so close that she also noticed the faint dark circles on Eric's face. She thought that this matter wasn't urgent, so she nodded and let Eric leave the party. Chapter 599. Eric only stayed in Los Angeles for one night and hurried back to New York the next day. Although Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank fought fiercely for Firefly's debt underwriting business, after reaching an agreement on cooperation, they still carried out a strict review of Firefly's business and financial information. They also investigated the investment intentions of investors. After many discussions, the two sides finally reached an agreement on the detailed cooperation terms and bond prices after half a month. After that, Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank submitted registration statements to the securities regulatory authorities in the United States and Germany respectively. The Western stock market was very complete. Most of the time, the government securities department only played a supervisory role. They often only ensured the accuracy of the information disclosed by the bond-issuing companies. They did not evaluate the investment prospects of the bonds. Even if the risk of the bonds was very high or had no investment value at all, as long as a detailed and accurate report was submitted, it could easily pass the review. Therefore, it was usually the bond underwriters who played a leading role in the bond issuance process. Firefly and the two lead underwriters finally established an annual interest rate of 5%. Compared to Firefly's asset credit rating, this annual interest rate was very high. If it weren't for the large scale of this bond financing, which increased the risk to a certain extent, Firefly's long-term bond interest rate would only be about 4%. During the early market testing process of Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank, investment funds from various states in the United States and Europe had cumulatively proposed to buy Firefly bonds. When the registration documents were sent to the securities trading departments of the United States and Germany for review, the success of Firefly securities issuance was basically confirmed. After the follow-up review by the Securities Department, Firefly only needed to cooperate with Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank to sell bonds and pay the funds to the original ABC shareholders. Eric handed over the follow-up of the securities issuance to Firefly's chief financial officer, Carolyn Elliott, and then began to participate in the specific merger process between Firefly and ABC. The two companies had already determined the specific merger plan in the early negotiations. What Firefly had to do was to once again conduct a detailed review of ABC's balance sheet and property list. Firefly's $15 billion acquisition of ABC easily exceeded the size of Viacom's acquisition of Paramount last year and became the largest acquisition in the North American media industry. With such a huge amount of funds, the acquisition result was, of course, a huge asset portfolio. In addition to ABC's most valuable public television network covering the United States and more than 200 affiliated television stations, ABC's assets also included 10 self-operated television stations and 21 radio stations in major cities in the United States, the ABC Television Production Department in Los Angeles, the 80% owned ESPN Sports Channel, the A&E Network jointly owned by the Hearst Group, and a batch of newspaper and magazine assets originally owned by Metropolitan Media. Moreover, these assets included a large number of properties such as real estate and cars. In addition, there were many other scattered assets. Eric even found a hand-drawn animation company in France on the list of assets of ABC. Firefly's acquisition team spent nearly a month since the ABC board of directors approved the acquisition to completely sort out the information of these assets. It was not until the morning of April 10 that Eric signed the final transaction agreement with Tom Murphy of ABC. At this point, Firefly finally succeeded in acquiring the largest television network in North America. After signing the merger agreement, the total share capital of Firefly had expanded several times and reached 135 million shares. Among them, the original shareholders of ABC would receive a total of 32.5 million shares of Firefly, excluding some of the outstanding shares that were directly exchanged for cash or bonds. Jeffrey and Michael Lynn had received 1.5 million shares and 500,000 shares from Eric, respectively. Firefly had spent a total of 1 million shares in the equity incentive program in recent years. The remaining shares were all held by Eric personally, totaling 99.5 million shares, accounting for 73.7% of the total share capital. After this merger, Firefly Pictures would also be named Firefly Group. The company would evolve from a film company to a comprehensive media group involved in film, television, music, books, tourism, and other fields. With Firefly's greater information disclosure during the acquisition of ABC, Firefly's financial, shareholding, and other information once again became the focus of public attention. At this time, most companies in good condition in the North American stock market maintained a price-to-earnings ratio between 10 and 30. A company's price-to-earnings ratio represented a company's profit and investment risk information. It was a very important financial data for listed companies. The price-to-earnings ratio was usually the price of each company's stock divided by the net income per share. Based on the P/E ratio of 20 times that of Time Warner, which was on the same level as Firefly, as well as the combined profits of Firefly and ABC in 1993, Firefly's total of 135 million shares would have a stock price of around $252. This also meant that Firefly's market value was estimated to be around $34 billion. In this way, Firefly had already firmly surpassed Time Warner to become the largest media group in North America. Before the acquisition of ABC, although Firefly surpassed Time Warner in terms of profits, its position was still questioned by many people because of the uncertainty of film investment. But at this time, no one doubted Firefly's position as the leader of media groups in the United States and even the world. Therefore, this became the focus of a lot of media attention. At the press conference after the signing of the final agreement, the reporter from Business Week asked the first question, "Mr. Williams, Firefly has now become the largest media group in North America and even the world, and you are so young. I think you will certainly not stop moving forward. So, what will Firefly do next? Eric certainly had further ambitions in his heart, which was to control the entire Hollywood through various direct or indirect means, but of course, he would not say it so easily. Moreover, although the acquisition of ABC was successfully completed, Firefly would definitely encounter a variety of problems in the future with such a large scale. The first thing Eric had to do was to solve a series of problems that might arise in the future. After thinking for a moment, Eric replied, "My current plan is to run the brand new Firefly Group well. Other than that, there are no other plans." The reporter from Businessweek continued to ask unwillingly, "Firefly and ABC are already the top companies in the Federation. Mr. Williams, don't you have the ambition to continue to expand?" Eric realized that the reporter might have some ulterior motives, but on the surface, he still replied with a smile, "I don't know if others have found out, but when I studied a lot of information, I found that many times, no matter the size, companies that have been merged will encounter a series of problems in the early stages of changing owners. Even if the company was in very good condition before, it is often difficult to avoid losses. Some companies with excellent operating conditions would even fall silent because of mergers, but some will become more prosperous. This process was very similar to the change of a country's political power. It was like a phoenix rising from the ashes. It would either be reborn from the ashes or be turned into ashes. I personally hope that Firefly can use 2 to 3 years to smoothly survive this nirvana period." After Eric finished speaking, there was a burst of whispers in the audience. The reporter from Businessweek fell into a short period of thought and immediately said, "Mr. Williams, your point of view is very novel. I have never heard of it before. Can you give a few examples to prove it?" "It's very simple. Take ABC as an example. In 1985, before ABC was acquired by MetLife Media, its annual profit was $130 million, but the second year after the merger, MetLife Media, ABC fell into a loss of $70 million. Mr. Tom Murphy and Mr. Buffett are very good management and investment talents. ABC's excellent profits in recent years are the best proof. So these should not be their problems, but the point of view I just mentioned. Of course, my personal knowledge is very limited, and I can't guarantee that this point of view is really a common phenomenon. So if there are professional economic experts who are interested, you can study it." After Eric finished speaking, he did not let the reporter from Businessweek continue to pester him. He personally pointed to a reporter and said, "Okay, next. Mr. Williams, according to recent media information, your personal assets are close to $20 billion, but we found that you have never done any charity activities, nor have you set up any charity fund. Don't you think this is a very lack of social responsibility?" Eric was stunned. This question was more pointed. His eyesight was pretty good, so he could see the words "Christian Science Monitor" written on the pass of this black female reporter, and he understood why she would ask such a question. In addition to Eric, Buffett, who was obviously not very enthusiastic about charity, was also sitting nearby. Eric did not know the details of the Buffett Foundation, but he knew very well that the Buffett Foundation at this time actually rarely took out money to do any charity activities. Most of the time, it was still investing according to Buffett's wishes. Most of the funds of the Buffett Foundation came from Berkshire Hathaway's stock dividends. Buffett did not personally contribute a single cent. After the female reporter asked the question, she looked at Buffett, who was sitting nearby. It was obvious that she was referring to something. At this time, Eric and Buffett were the first and second richest people in North America, respectively. Faced with such a sensitive question, Eric had to think carefully for a while before he said, "I personally think that a real sense of responsibility is to use the wealth in one's hands to create more jobs for society, so that ordinary people can support themselves, instead of reaping without sowing. Firefly has been doing its best to do this. For example, in recent years, Firefly has built Firefly Studios in Los Angeles and invested in the Digital Domain Studio in Florida, creating tens of thousands of new jobs for the Federation. Of course, general charity has also played a very positive role in society. There are many people in this society who are in difficult situations and in need of help. In the past, because I was busy with my personal business, I neglected this aspect. Therefore, I will set up a corresponding charity fund in the next few years and increase the investment in charity activities. Eric's answer was a little tactful, and the black female reporter was obviously a little dissatisfied. But this time, the host realized his mistake and quickly called another reporter. The following questions were not too out of line. Most of the reporters asked about the next stage of Firefly's operations, such as restructuring, layoffs, or business adjustments, and so on. After the press conference ended, the group quickly moved to the routine celebration reception. Eric had a glass of champagne in his hand. Just as he was about to talk to the former ABC president, Robert Iger, Tom Murphy and Buffett came over side by side. The two old men even looked like they were going to condemn him. After the merger, ABC removed the bamboo seat on the board of directors. According to the agreement, Tom Murphy would continue to be ABC's CEO until the end of 1995. Both Tom Murphy and Buffett originally thought that this was Eric's compromise to them, but from Eric's speech at the press conference, the two old men realized that they felt too good about themselves. This little guy was obviously trying to squeeze the last bit of value out of these old men. "Hey, Eric, I finally understand. It turns out that you insist on letting me, an old man who will soon be 70 years old, continue to be ABC's CEO so that ABC can survive this merger smoothly." Eric looked at Tom Murphy, who was aggressive but still had a faint smile on his face. He shrugged slightly and said with a smile, "But Tom, I have never denied that this is not my plan. Both of you are now major shareholders of Firefly. You shouldn't be opposed to making ABC better, right?" When Tom Murphy heard Eric's words, he suddenly felt that he seemed to be really angry for no reason, but of course, he would not admit it. He smiled and scolded, "No wonder Warren just said that you're too tactful." "Oh, I think that's a compliment," Eric said to Buffett with a smile. Buffett shook his head with a smile and said, "I agree with what you said to the female reporter. Creating more jobs for society is real charity. The rest is just letting those who want to reap without sowing. I have encountered many similar situations before where people took the money of donors and squandered it." Chapter 600. Eric had encountered too many bad things about charity. Whether it was in his previous life or in this life, Eric was not interested in this topic. Tom Murphy also felt Eric's mood, so he changed the topic and said, "Eric, I heard that the sequel to Jurassic Park is already in preparation. Are you really not going to continue to be the director?" Now that he has become a shareholder of Firefly, the film project of Jurassic Park, which involves billions of dollars of benefits, has also become the focus of Buffett's attention. When he heard his old friend mention this, Buffett also echoed, "Eric, Jurassic Park is such an important project. I think it's better for you to personally control it in the end. I don't think anyone wants to see anything go wrong with the sequel of this film." Eric also expected this situation to occur when Firefly introduced other shareholders. However, he was not like Michael Eisner in the original Spacetime, who forcibly implemented his personal will after acquiring ABC, which eventually led to the originally profitable ABC quickly falling into a loss again. Now that Firefly had developed to this extent, Eric knew that he could not control it alone. Therefore, it was important to maintain a good relationship with the shareholders and management. Therefore, after hearing the advice of the two old men, Eric patiently explained, "I will still personally serve as the producer of the sequel to Jurassic Park, and I will also consider the selection of the director very carefully to ensure that this project is foolproof. However, for at least the next year, I will put more energy into the content production of ABC. Although ABC achieved the best result in the North American market share last year, I found that after the end of Growing Pains, ABC has not produced any phenomenal series for several years." Hearing Eric's plan, Tom Murphy nodded understandingly and said, "I heard that Firefly has taken back the copyright of Friends? Yes, Eric noticed that Tom Murphy wanted to continue, so he continued, "However, The X-Files and The Millionaire were originally developed and copyrighted by Firefly and Fox. These two shows can't be taken back. There seems to be another show called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I heard that this TV series has caused a great response among the youth group," Buffett suddenly interrupted. He shook his head slightly and said with a regretful expression, "Eric, you are too generous to Fox." "Because Firefly and Fox were partners." Eric casually said, "However, in addition to Friends, I have already selected a good TV series for ABC. It is currently in production. You can see the pilot episode next month. Oh. Tom Murphy's interest was piqued. He asked, "What kind of TV series is it?" "A medical drama," Eric said. "It's called The Emergency Room Story. If you are interested, I will ask someone to send you an outline of the story tomorrow." "That's not necessary." Tom Murphy shook his head. "I'm still looking forward to seeing the pilot episode as soon as possible." "No problem. I will invite you as soon as it's done. Warren, if you are interested, you can come and watch it together." "If I can spare some time, I will come over," Buffett said. "Also, Eric, since you can't take back The Millionaire, why don't you come up with a similar reality show?" Eric smiled and said, "I already have one." Firefly bought the concept of a reality show called Survivor from a British producer last month. They are still perfecting the specific details of the show. It is expected that it can be launched at the same time as Friends and The Emergency Room Story in the fall. Although the famous reality show Survivor was only launched on CBS in 2000 in the original spacetime, it had actually been conceived as early as 1994. It was just that it had not been adopted by the North American network. Many viewers found that the major TV stations in the United States were always used to remake or buy TV shows that had already aired in other countries, so they often used this to tease the Americans for their lack of creativity. However, this was not the case. The major TV networks in the United States usually launched a total of more than 90 hours of daytime and primetime TV shows every week. However, the most important and valuable of these were only the 3 hours of primetime TV shows every night, 4 hours on Sundays, which totaled 22 hours of primetime TV shows every week. This was because the public television network often had its own program schedule for daytime TV shows, and the affiliated TV stations also arranged the program list according to their own situation. However, the primetime every day was broadcast by the major TV networks and hundreds of their subsidiary TV networks. This also meant that every program in the primetime had to go through strict screening before it was finally broadcast. After all, once a TV show was established, it was impossible to immediately cut it after 1 or 2 episodes because of low ratings. Due to the restrictions of the contract and other factors, even if the ratings were very bad, it still needed to be broadcast after 6 episodes before it could be stopped. Once this happened, the TV network would lose a huge amount of advertising fees because of the failure of the show. Therefore, introducing a TV show that had proven its ratings potential from the English-speaking cultural circle was undoubtedly the most secure approach. While Eric was collecting ideas for the show, the creator of Survivor, Charlie Parsons, was pitching his idea to the major TV stations in the United Kingdom and the United States. However, without exception, all of them were rejected. After Eric discovered this idea, he asked the TV production department of Firefly to secretly buy out the creative rights of this show. However, the format of the show conceived by Charlie Parsons was very rough compared to Eric's memory. Recently, Eric had been asking the production department of Firefly to continue perfecting this project. Buffett and Tom Murphy listened to Eric briefly explain the general idea of Survivor. Buffett only felt that this show was quite interesting, but Tom Murphy, who had worked in the TV industry for decades, saw the subversive idea of Survivor and praised it repeatedly. Eric did not show too much pride in Tom Murphy's praise. After all, the last thing in this world was creativity. Not to mention that the idea of Survivor must have been reviewed by the original ABC production department, and then unsurprisingly, it was casually thrown into a corner. The reason for Tom Murphy's reaction was more due to the halo created by Eric's series of successful shows. Just like any movie project he had his eyes on now, it would be valued and fought over by Hollywood. "Warren, Tom, there's one more thing I want to tell you in advance." After drinking a few mouthfuls of champagne to moisten his throat, Eric said to Buffett and Tom Murphy, "I plan to divest all of the newspapers and magazines under the company." When Buffett heard this, he immediately frowned slightly. Tom Murphy asked, "Eric, why do you want to do this? These newspapers have been continuously profitable in recent years. I don't see the need to divest them, and these newspapers can just expand the media influence of Firefly." According to the historical process, the internet boom would enter the explosive period next year. Although the current paper media still occupied a very important position in the media industry, Eric clearly remembered that with the rise of new media on the internet, these paper media would soon become a phoenix without feathers, and their value would plummet. Many traditional paper media groups that were originally in the world's top 500 could not escape the fate of a sharp decline in assets at the beginning of the 20th century. Now was the time when the official paper media was the most valuable, so of course, Eric wanted to take the opportunity to cash in. Tom, I don't deny the value of these newspapers, but the focus of Firefly's business is not on these. Firefly will always focus on the film and TV business and other derivative industries in the future, so I plan to divest these assets. Eric looked at Buffett again. Warren, I know you have always valued the newspaper business. If Berkshire is interested in these assets, maybe we can find time to talk about it. I will give you a more reasonable price. Eric added in his heart. If Buffett found out that he was cheated in the future, he could not blame him. Berkshire Hathaway owned shares in many newspapers, including the Washington Post. Buffett had always maintained a strong investment interest in the newspaper industry because of his childhood experience as a newsboy. However, Buffett was very clear that the assets of the former MetLife company were absolutely impossible to acquire for less than $1 billion. But Buffett had his own plans for the more than $1 billion that he cashed out from this transaction. He planned to buy all the remaining shares of Berkshire's employees' insurance company. Berkshire could not raise more than $1 billion to buy these newspapers in a short time. Moreover, although Eric's expression was very sincere, Buffett was still keenly aware that something was wrong. This made him cautious. Eric, if you can wait for a year, Berkshire does not mind buying these newspapers. But now, the funds that Berkshire recovered through this acquisition have been used for other purposes. I don't have enough cash yet. It's okay. Eric still looked very honest. Firefly's need for funds is not that strong at the moment, so Berkshire can pay for this acquisition with shares. The current price of Berkshire Hathaway's shares was about $20,000. Although this was already the highest share price in North America, Eric knew that in the next 10 years, the price of Berkshire shares would continue to rise to an astonishing price of $200,000. Even if these newspapers were sold for $1 billion now, 10 years later, they would resell for $10 billion. When Buffett, who had always been stingy with the sale and transfer of shares, heard Eric mention this plan, he immediately changed from being cautious to vigilant. He shook his head and said, Eric, Berkshire will not acquire companies through stock mergers and acquisitions. Maybe you can contact other media groups. Eric shook his head regretfully. Well, if Berkshire wants to take over, you can call me at any time. I will. Buffett nodded, then pointed not far away and said, Eric, I saw an old friend. Excuse me. After Buffett said that, he winked at Tom Murphy, who wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Tom Murphy swallowed what he wanted to say and walked away with Warren Buffett. After watching the two old men leave, Eric looked at his watch. It was already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He looked around and found Jeffrey. He walked over. Seeing Eric approaching, a middle-aged man who was talking to Jeffrey raised his glass to Eric and walked away politely. Jeffrey asked, Eric, what were you talking to them about just now? Some program production matters, Eric said. Jeffrey, today is the two little guys' birthday. I'm going to East Hampton. Do you want to come with me? Jeffrey shook his head and refused with a smile. The two little guys are already 1 year old. I'll ask my secretary to help pick out 2 birthday gifts for them later. But birthday parties are for you young people, so I won't be going. Eric said, Let's go together. Chris and Emily will be there today. Maybe you can talk to them about the wedding. The two of them. Jeffrey had a helpless look on his face, but after thinking about it, he said, Okay then. I'll go say hello to Katzenberg and the others. The helicopter should be on the rooftop now. You can go there first. In April, East Hampton, Long Island, was full of spring and vitality. The helicopter slowly landed on the lawn of the Seaside Manor in East Hampton. Eric helped Jeffrey get off the helicopter and said a few words to the pilot. Then, the helicopter left again. Joanna and Virginia also came up with a large group of people at this time. When the two women called Eric to talk about the two little guys' first birthday party, they hoped to invite some guests. Eric could understand their thoughts. They didn't want the two little guys to remain unknown as illegitimate children. Eric never wanted to keep the identity of his children a secret, so he agreed. At this time, more than a dozen people came over. In addition to Joanna, Virginia, Chris, and Emily who were holding the two little guys, Eric also saw Elizabeth and Drew, but the two women were far away. In addition, Eric also saw Virginia's brother, Michael Madsen, and a tall woman in her 30s next to Michael Madsen. She should be his wife, and Joanna's sister, Eva Pakula. Other than that, Eric didn't know much about the others. Chapter 601. After some introductions, the invited guests were not only their relatives and friends, but also some neighbors that the women were familiar with when they lived in Long Island. The children's birthday party was scheduled to start at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They didn't invite a party company, but it was in the form of a buffet. After some simple greetings, Joanna took the women to prepare dinner. As one of the most famous areas for the rich in New York, East Hampton and Southampton gathered a large number of rich people, politicians, and celebrities from all walks of life. Although there was no lack of middle-class residents, those who could buy a property of the same size near the manor that Eric had his eyes on would not be ordinary people. After the women left, Eric exchanged business cards with a group of men. He wasn't surprised to see titles such as the president of a certain company or the director of a certain foundation on the business card. After all, it was the first time for many people to meet. After simply congratulating Eric on the completion of the acquisition of ABC, no one took the initiative to mention this matter again. Instead, they changed the topic to the topic of economic orthodoxy that Westerners were more interested in. They unscrupulously ridiculed the president, wantonly attacked a certain tax policy, or talked about the prospects of a certain industry. In fact, most of the time, the so-called network was formed like this. Everyone drank and chatted together, and became familiar with each other. In the future, when they encountered a problem, they could come up with a way to contact each other. This was a kind of resource. Although everyone present was older than Eric, with the experience of 2 lifetimes, Eric could handle this group of people with ease. Many times, he could even take the initiative to bring up some topics. Gradually, the people present also neglected the fact that Eric was less than 25 years old at this time. As everyone's attention focused on Eric, the topic unknowingly shifted to movies. Hearing that the senior manager for Merrill Lynch, Pierre Clark, was worried about the increasing scale of film investment in recent years, Eric said, from Gone with the Wind in Hollywood's golden age to Ben-Hur and Cleopatra in the 50s and 60s, to Heaven's Gate in the early 80s, Hollywood has never stopped the production of so-called blockbuster movies. Among them, there is no lack of big-budget movies that have put film companies in a difficult position, such as Cleopatra and Heaven's Gate. If it was before the 90s, it would be a worrying thing for film companies to be more and more inclined to make blockbuster movies, but now the entertainment industry is completely different from 10 years ago. Globalization is an inevitable trend, and the proportion of Hollywood's total overseas revenue is increasing. This means that if film companies want to continue to maintain their advantage in this revolution, they must produce films that are less subject to regional cultural restrictions. CG special effects films and big-budget action films are the most guaranteed types of films. I'm sure that in the next 10 years, blockbuster movies with a total cost of about $100 million will become the mainstream of several major Hollywood film companies. The vast overseas market and more derivative profit channels will also ensure that these films can achieve enough profit. While everyone was deep in thought, another short and thin middle-aged man asked again, "Eric, why not comedies and horror films? These films also don't have too many cultural restrictions. I've watched Home Alone, Pretty Woman, and Scary Island that you produced. The quality of these films is excellent, and the cost is low. The return on investment is easily more than 10 times. Eric remembered that this middle-aged man was called Kenneth Norton. On his business card, it was written that he was the president of an unknown company. He smiled and shook his head. "Mr. Norton, you only see the success of films like Home Alone, but what you don't see is that there are at least hundreds of comedies or horror films that are lucky enough to be released in theaters every year in Hollywood, but in the end, they end up failing to recover their costs, let alone being sold to the global market. Blockbuster films are different. At least before the global market is saturated with demand for this type of film, these films rely on big stars and big scenes. Even if they fail in the domestic market, they are still very popular with the audience overseas. Take last year's Bear Peak, for example. Due to the impact of Jurassic Park, the North American box office of this film, which cost up to $70 million, was only equal to the production cost. MGM and Carlock fell into a huge loss because of this. However, in the subsequent overseas distribution process, Bear Peak achieved $170 million in box office. Although the overseas distribution ratio is very low and the investors are still in a state of loss, Bear Peak is still very lucky compared to those low and mid-cost films that can't even get the opportunity to be distributed overseas. Kenneth Norton couldn't help but nod. Then, he smiled and looked at Eric. He said casually, "I didn't expect Eric to have such a thorough understanding of the film industry. If Firefly is listed in the future, I will definitely buy the shares without hesitation." "Then you will be disappointed, Mr. Norton." Eric smiled and shook his head slightly. He said, "Firefly doesn't have any plans to be listed yet." "Oh, you can't say that. I plan to separate the digital domain special effects company and list it separately in the next 2 years. There is also the special effects software company Firefly Software. These two companies are really burning too much money. I have to raise some operating funds publicly." Other than Jeffrey and Chris, who already knew some inside information, and Michael Madsen, who couldn't get a word in on these matters, the rest of the people heard Eric's words. Their expressions couldn't help but change significantly. Of course, they didn't believe that Eric would choose to list these two companies just because they were burning too much money. The terrifying profitability of Firefly's system could definitely provide sufficient funds for these two companies. Although they didn't know Eric's specific thoughts, they could all realize that once these two companies were listed, as part of Firefly's system, they would definitely be strongly sought after by the capital market. Merrill Lynch's Pierre Clark completely let go of his reservations at this time. He couldn't help but ask, "Eric, do you have a specific timetable?" "Not yet." Eric shook his head and said, "I don't have the energy to do these things recently. However, the latest plan to be listed won't be later than the end of next year." With the commercial operation of Firefly Software, there were more and more special effects companies of all sizes in North America and even the world. Eric had to cash out Digital Domain and Firefly Software before the special effects company was completely downgraded from aristocrats to commoners. According to the American company listing process and the restriction on the sale of major shareholders' shares, the listing operation would start next year. In 1997, when the dot-com bubble began to rise and the Nasdaq exploded, Eric could use the following years to gradually cash out. After the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, he could buy back the shares of Digital Domain and Firefly Software at a low price. Now that he said his plan in front of these people, it was a kind of early warm-up. Although there were not many people present, Eric believed that the news would spread throughout Wall Street in a few days. Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley were both well-known investment banks on Wall Street. Last month, they also participated in the bidding for the issuance of Firefly's bonds, but in the end, Morgan Stanley won the underwriting rights due to its good relationship with Firefly. Pierre Clark realized that if he could pull some strings and let the company obtain the stock issuance rights of even one of the two companies, then he could at least get the position of vice president of Wachovia Securities. However, just as he was about to continue speaking, he looked at the people around him and realized that this was not the right occasion. However, he thought that Eric would definitely continue to stay in New York for a while, so he decided that it was best to live with his family in East Hampton for the time being. This way, he could get in touch with Eric more often. Perhaps he could negotiate this matter in advance. After all, if Morgan Stanley could offer something, so could Wachovia Securities. Everyone chatted casually. Time passed by, and another group of guests came one after another. As the party approached, the smell of barbecue gradually drifted in the manor. Some of the children brought by the guests ran around the manor. The little figure took a skewer of barbecued chicken wings from Elizabeth. Elizabeth squatted down and whispered a few words to the little guy. The little guy stumbled over to Eric. "Daddy, Daddy." Emma's childish and crisp voice stunned the group of men. Then, They looked at the little guy in unison. They knew very well that Eric already had 2 children, but they did not know what was wrong with this little girl. Before Eric had time to explain, Emma had already rushed to Eric's side. She grabbed the sofa's armrest and raised the chicken wing in her other hand high up to Eric. "Daddy, this is for you. Chicken wing." Eric patted Emma's little head and smiled. "Good girl, Emma. But Daddy can't eat now. You eat it yourself." "Emma, I'm not hungry. You eat." Emma tried her best to pass the chicken wing to Eric. Eric saw that the little one was not going to give up until she got what she wanted. Just as he was about to take it, the little one lost her grip and the greasy chicken wing fell onto Eric's trousers. It fell. Emma did not realize the consequences of Eric's trousers being stained with grease. She clung to the sofa's armrest and stuck her head out to grab it. Eric was worried that the chicken wing would fall onto the sofa and get another layer of grease. He hurriedly picked it up and got up to apologize to everyone. He then took the little guy's hand and got up to leave. After leaving Emma in Joanna's care, Eric walked to the villa to change his trousers. Elizabeth saw Eric's movements and tiptoed in. Eric walked into the bedroom and found a new pair of trousers from the closet. He turned his head to Elizabeth, who was leaning against the door, and said, "You're not here to celebrate the little guy's birthday, are you?" Elizabeth watched Eric take off his trousers and change his clothes in front of her. She blushed slightly and said, "I happened to be in New York recently, so I came over. I didn't expect to meet Drew. Humph, if I had known, I wouldn't have come." "Then just don't talk to her," Eric said while holding back his laughter. Elizabeth had received a private school education since she was a child. She did not even know how to swear. When she bickered with Drew, she gave Eric the feeling that she was a little rookie who had just walked out of the novice village. She had to quarrel with a max-level godly player. She was simply looking for trouble. The most important thing was that she often took it out on herself when she was beaten to tears. It was too unreasonable. Elizabeth felt the teasing in Eric's tone, but she just rolled her eyes at him. Eric threw the swollen trousers into the bathroom, then walked out and said, "Okay, if you have something to say, just say it. If you don't, I'm going to leave. I wanted to ask you about this when we were at the Oscars last time." Elizabeth was slightly embarrassed, but she still said, "Didn't you say before that you don't know how to run a print media?" "Oh, this." Eric suddenly understood and asked with a smile, "Your old man is interested in the newspapers I have." Elizabeth shrugged and said, "Yeah, anyway, I'm just asking. If you don't want to do it, just pretend I didn't mention it." Eric pulled over a chair next to the dressing table in the bedroom and sat down. He pointed to the big bed next to him and said, "Actually, at the cocktail party after the press conference at noon, I asked Warren Buffett's Berkshire if he was interested in taking over those newspapers." Elizabeth walked to the bed and sat down. She asked, "So, you really want to sell those newspapers?" "Generally speaking, I'm a person who keeps his word," Eric said with a smile. Elizabeth did not expect Eric to go back on his word, so she did not refute him. She said, "Then have you talked to Buffett?" "No." Eric shook his head and said, "But if you want to hear the truth, I don't recommend News Corporation to take over these newspapers." "Why? Is it still your view that the online media will replace traditional media? Something like that. Maybe you don't know yet, but the cumulative number of visitors to the Yahoo portal has reached 20 million. Now the average number of visitors per day is more than 5 million. After I'm done here, I plan to increase the investment in Yahoo's information section." Eric said and joked, "Why don't you help me recommend a suitable editor-in-chief from News Corporation?" Elizabeth was a little surprised by the data given by Eric. News Corporation's newspapers in Australia, the United Kingdom, and North America added up to less than 5 million users. If Yahoo really had 5 million visitors per day, maybe the situation that Eric said would really happen. However, she still found it hard to believe. How can there be so many? Chapter 602. The average daily visitor count was more than 5 million. Not only Elizabeth, but most people would not believe this number, but it was already an indisputable fact. Since the emergence of personal computers in the 1980s, tens of millions of users had accumulated in North America alone. These were the important foundations for the successful promotion of online services. After Clinton came to power, he increased the promotion of the Information Highway Plan at the government level. However, the most important thing was that the graphical interface browser appeared 2 years ago, which lowered the threshold for ordinary people to explore the online world. Coupled with the content support provided by Yahoo's portal and free email and other online services, the online services were no longer limited to professional computing people. They began to expand to the widest user base. That was why Yahoo's user base was so large today. If you really want to find out the reason, Eric replied when he heard Elizabeth's doubts, it's similar to the emergence of television in the 50s and 60s. People discovered that they could observe the world through a small box, so they chose to buy it. Investors saw that it was profitable and built TV stations to provide content, so it gradually became a very large industry. The current situation is that the computer network can not only observe the world, but also communicate with the world. The relevant hardware and software conditions have been accumulated for more than a decade. Once it starts to explode, of course, the expansion will be very rapid. Elizabeth said, but the traditional newspaper industry won't be eliminated because of this, right? Eric nodded and said, of course not, but it will be far from being as successful as before. Elizabeth suddenly smiled and said, then what should we do now? I'll tell my old man, I'll tell my dad that the newspaper industry is going to decline soon. Let's not buy it. Do you think he will change his deep-rooted view just because of a few words from you? Eric spread his hands and said, then, when Firefly organizes this part of the assets for public sale in the second half of the year, News Corporation will participate in the bidding. Firefly will be sold to whoever offers the highest price. Elizabeth felt that this seemed to be the only way. She would go back and tell her old man what Eric had said. Even if it did not affect his final judgment, at least during the bidding, News Corporation would have scruples in this regard and would not bid too aggressively. One more thing. The two were about to leave when Eric stopped Elizabeth and said, don't tell anyone about the size of Yahoo's user data. Even though Yahoo, IE, and Hotmail had been closely watched by the industry, on one hand, the industry only saw the three companies burning money without any results. On the other hand, the three companies never released any company data, which was why they were able to maintain a quiet expansion for several years. Although many people had already realized that the user scale of the three companies was very large, without specific data, it was not enough to stimulate too many people to wake up. If the data was leaked, many industry giants would realize what 20 million total users and more than 5 million visitors a day meant. With such a large user base, even if there were no profit prospects for the time being, it would definitely be a field with broad investment prospects. At that time, it would attract a large number of competitors into this field. Elizabeth stopped and asked, not even my father? Eric nodded solemnly and said, especially don't tell your old man. Elizabeth punched Eric in annoyance, but she still agreed. I know, but these things can't be hidden forever, right? Eric clenched his fist confidently and waved it gently. He said, as long as I have one more year of planning, the chips in my hands will be enough to crush any competitors. Portals and online mailboxes were relatively easy to copy, but as long as Steve Mitnick's instant messaging software was promoted, coupled with the technical barriers of the IE browser and some other means, it would weave a huge user network, and it would be like a black hole that could suck in all the new internet users. The Matthew effect of the strong becoming stronger in the internet industry was very obvious. Once a behemoth in a certain field was formed, it would be difficult for other similar companies to compete with it. Elizabeth couldn't help but stare at Eric's calm and confident face for a few seconds. She felt Eric's gaze on her and quickly looked away. She said, by the way, you just said that you want me to recommend an editor-in-chief of Yahoo for you? Eric saw Virginia waving at them outside. He walked out with Elizabeth and asked, do you have any good candidates? I don't know if they're good candidates. You can only judge for yourself. Elizabeth said, you know Vanity Fair, right? Yes. Eric nodded and immediately thought of someone. You're not talking about Tina Brown, are you? Will she be willing to leave Condé Nast? Portals had just emerged, and Eric could only choose talents from traditional media. This person must have a strong enterprising spirit and a non-conservative character. Otherwise, it would be difficult to accept the new field of internet media. Tina Brown had led Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, and many other magazines back to the top through a series of reforms in the original spacetime. She should be in her early 40s now, and she didn't lack these required characters. Moreover, she was at the peak of her career. If he could really poach this woman to be the editor-in-chief of Yahoo, it would be a good choice. However, in his memory, Tina Brown left the editor-in-chief position of Vanity Fair magazine and directly transferred to another magazine under the Condé Nast Publishing Group, The New Yorker, to be the editor-in-chief. Elizabeth said, "Tina just left Vanity Fair at the beginning of the year. We're still quite familiar with each other. I saw her at a party 2 days ago." Condé Nast planned to let her become the editor-in-chief of The New Yorker, but Tina is still hesitating. She's not a person who likes to repeat herself. If there's a better choice, I think she wouldn't mind giving it a try. Eric said, "Then leave me your phone number later." As night fell, the Manor Villa was brightly lit both inside and outside. Since it was a birthday party, it naturally began with blowing out the candles. Everyone tried their best to coax the 2 little ones who had just turned 1. Hawaii, who was already able to call for her mother, looked at the people around her who were pointing at the candle on the cake in front of her and egging her on. She seemed to be very impatient. In the end, she simply reached out her little hand and grabbed the candle, extinguishing it. It caused a burst of laughter. Little Kevin, on the other hand, was frightened by a circle of strangers and started crying. In the end, the candle was blown out by Emma, who was eager to try. After the cake was distributed, the party officially began. The table was filled with dinners that they could help themselves to. The guests began to gather together in 2s and 3s, sitting or standing. Eric walked through the crowd with a glass of red wine in his hand and greeted the guests. He was continuing the topic about the movie with Merrill Lynch's Pierre Clark and the others from Merrill Lynch when Joanna suddenly walked to his side and gently pulled his sleeve. "Sorry, excuse me," Eric nodded to the few of them and then walked to the side with Joanna. He asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" Joanna just said softly, "Eric, come with me." Eric followed Joanna into the villa with some confusion. They passed through the hall full of guests and came upstairs. Joanna pointed to the bedroom and said, "Vicky is crying. You go and comfort her." "I don't know what to say." Eric stopped and asked, "What's going on? Wasn't she fine just now?" "It's about Kevin," Joanna said. "Shasha can speak more than a month ago, but Kevin can't say anything. And just now..." Eric understood halfway through. He smiled helplessly and said, "You go down and entertain the guests. I can do it myself." When he opened the bedroom door, he saw Virginia bending over to change the diapers of the little guy who was lying on the bed. Eric walked over and casually leaned on the big bed. He looked at Virginia's slightly red eyes and said, "You don't have to do this. Boys develop later than girls. Einstein can only speak when he's 3 years old. The little guy is only 1 year old. Why are you so anxious?" Everyone thinks that Kevin is stupid. They just don't say it. Virginia felt a lump in her throat. It seemed like she was going to cry again. She handed the little guy to Eric and said, "You can hug him. Maybe you won't like him when he grows up." "What nonsense are you talking about?" Eric glared at the woman. He held the little guy in his arms and stretched out a finger to tease his son. Kevin, who was staring at the finger, grabbed it and put it into his mouth. The few little baby teeth that had just grown out were itchy. Virginia looked at the intimate appearance of the father and son and felt a little relieved. She pulled a chair over and sat on the bed. Suddenly, she sighed regretfully and said, "I should have chosen to do a cesarean section. Kevin must be like this because of the lack of oxygen for a long time." "Didn't you test Kevin's IQ and it said that there was no problem?" Virginia said, "He's such a young child. How can it be accurate?" Eric realized that this stubborn woman would not be able to change her mind. He could only whisper to his son lying beside him, "Baby, learn to speak quickly. If you don't speak, Mommy won't like you anymore." The little guy stared at Eric with his round eyes. It seemed that he did not understand Eric's words. Eric looked at his son and said tentatively, "Come, let's hear you call me Daddy first. Learn from me. Dad, Dad." After a short silence, the little guy in his arms suddenly made a short syllable. "Pa, Pa." Although the pronunciation was very vague, Eric and Virginia could hear it clearly in the quiet bedroom. Virginia abruptly stood up from the chair with a look of pleasant surprise on her face. She was no longer as sad as before. "I knew it. This little bastard is definitely pretending to be stupid." Eric suddenly laughed and turned the little guy over to smack his little but gently. He said, "And he's waiting here to take advantage of me. He won't make a sound until I call him first." Even though Eric didn't use any strength, the little fellow immediately started crying. Virginia hurriedly snatched her son from Eric's hands and coaxed him with a doting expression. She then bluntly chased the culprit, who made her precious baby cry, out of the room. When Eric went downstairs, Joanna walked up to him nervously. "It's okay." Eric smiled and told Joanna what happened just now. Joanna was also relieved. Now Vicky can finally rest assured. "She's just worried," Eric said with a smile. Most of the guests in the villa were female. Eric and Joanna said a few words briefly and were about to leave. Chris's girlfriend, Emily, came over and blocked Eric's way. "You can't just leave me with a sentence. I have contacted a lot of models. Now I only need your proposal." Eric smiled and pointed outside. "You're still in the mood to worry about this." Emily showed a troubled look, but she couldn't blame Eric for bringing Jeffrey. "Chris will explain to Jeffrey. We just bought Ltd and are so busy every day that we don't even have time to sleep. We don't have time to think about marriage. Don't change the subject, okay? You encouraged us to buy Ltd. You can't wash your hands of it." "I never intended to wash my hands of it," Eric said. "It's just that I haven't had the time recently. It's not like you don't know this. Even if I tell you my plan, you won't be able to do it yourself. I have to do it myself. You can only cooperate." "What can't I do?" "You can tell me the important thing first. At least I can prepare in advance." "I plan to direct the annual Victoria's Secret show myself." Emily was a little disappointed. She retorted, "Is that all? How can I not do it? You were at the New York Fashion Week last year. I was in charge of the Brighton Fashion Show. Victoria's Secret also has an annual new collection launch show." "Of course, that's not all. I want to gather the top models from all over the world to walk the show. I want to invite the most popular pop singers to be there. Through the full range of media marketing channels such as newspapers, magazine promotions, live TV broadcasts, and online discussions, the fashion show will be turned into a fashion carnival. I want Victoria's Secret to become a global symbol." Although Eric had only revealed a simple idea, Emily was so shocked by Eric's huge idea that her jaw almost dropped. She stuttered, How much would this cost?" "First of all, my personal director's fee will be at least $10 million, and that's the discounted price," Eric joked. Then he said, "We should focus on how much money this marketing strategy can make for the company, not how much money it will cost. I promise, compared to the expected future income, this money is absolutely insignificant." Chapter 603. In the original spacetime, Victoria's Secret once occupied more than 40% of the market share in the United States, with a net profit of $1 billion per year. This was simply a miracle for a traditional industry that did not have a high market entry threshold. Compared to the huge profits, the cost of the Victoria's Secret annual show that cost tens of millions was not worth mentioning. Emily was not immediately moved by Eric's big picture. She did some simple calculations in her mind and said, "According to what you said, if we want to create a sensational effect, we'll need to invest $15 to $20 million in this annual show. This money is enough for the company to advertise on the TV station for a year. I've just stabilized the company. If we suddenly launch such a risky publicity plan, it will definitely cause strong opposition from the other shareholders and management." Eric thought for a moment and said, How about this? LTD will transfer the copyright of the Victoria's Secret annual show to Firefly. I'll cover all the production costs. You just need to assist from the side. If the annual show doesn't have the effect I said, Firefly will bear all the losses. If it succeeds, LTD will have to pay Firefly's copyright fee if they want to continue producing this show. In his memory, the annual viewership of Victoria's Secret annual show was around 10 million people. Although it could only be done once a year, the advertising fees earned from the show's broadcast on ABC, the subsequent income from cable television broadcasting rights, and the distribution of videotapes were enough for Firefly to recoup all the costs. If they got the copyright now, once the show was successful, LTD would definitely not give up this annual show that played a huge role in promoting Victoria's Secret. The annual copyright fee would allow Firefly to earn another sum of money. Emily quickly thought of the key and said, in other words, if the show is successful, LTD will have to spend money to get Firefly's permission to continue producing the annual show every year? Of course. Eric nodded and looked at Emily's slightly frowning face. He smiled and said, risk and opportunity always coexist. If LTD is not willing to take the risk, then Firefly can't spend a lot of money and not get any benefits, right? But you can rest assured that Firefly and LTD are like my left and right hands. I definitely won't ask for too much. Emily hesitated but did not immediately agree. She said, I'll hold a high-level meeting tomorrow to discuss it and give you the news. No problem. I'll be in New York for a while. You can contact me anytime. Emily was about to turn around and leave when she suddenly stopped and asked, if we choose to fund the production ourselves, what is your cooperation plan? Eric said, we can operate it in the same way as the TV and movie cooperation. LTD will be the investor and producer, and Firefly will be the agent for the distribution of the TV and video channels. Both parties will agree on a suitable profit-sharing ratio. The lively birthday party lasted until 10 o'clock in the evening. Because many people still had to work the next day, the guests began to leave one after another. Eric personally arranged for Virginia's brother and his family to live in another manor in East Hampton. When he returned to the manor by the sea, all the guests had left. Only a few servants were cleaning up the mess outside the villa. Pushing open the door and walking into the villa hall, Eric saw two identical tall figures shuttling back and forth to clean up the tableware into the kitchen. Virginia sat on the sofa and was still excitedly talking to little Kevin, who was finally willing to speak in a language that only mother and son could understand. Joanna sat quietly next to Virginia with a book in her hand. On the single sofa, Eva was holding the remote control and changing the TV channel. After greeting the two women, Eric looked at the busy twins and asked, where are Drew and Shashya? Joanna looked up and said, in Shashya's bedroom. Drew said he would personally coax Shashya to sleep. You seem to trust Drew quite a lot. Eric smiled and sat down next to Joanna. He rested his chin on her shoulder and smelled the faint fragrance of the woman. He looked at the book in Russian and asked, what book are you reading? You can even speak Russian? Anna Karenina. Joanna intimately leaned on Eric and said, when I was in school, there was a compulsory Russian class. It wasn't difficult to learn, so I slowly learned it. Eric nodded and remembered that when Joanna was in school, Poland was still in the Soviet Union. It wasn't surprising that she was required to learn Russian. He still remembered that when he was in elementary school in his previous life, the chubby language teacher also knew Russian. It was said that she learned it when the Soviet Union was on good terms with Poland. But relatively speaking, the Polish language belonged to the Slavic family, so it would be easier for Joanna to learn Russian. Eric sent Eva and the twins to rest and chatted intimately with the two women for a while. It was already 11 o'clock. Just when he was about to go to bed, he realized that his daughter was nowhere to be seen. You two go upstairs first. I'll go take a look. I don't think she's asleep in Shashya's room. The two nursery rooms were on the first floor. When Eric walked into his daughter's room, he saw Drew leaning on Hawaii's bed with a book in his hand. When he saw Eric, he immediately stopped. For a moment, Eric didn't notice Drew's momentary abnormality. When he saw that his daughter seemed to be awake, he walked over to the bed and wanted to coax her. Only then did he notice that Hawaii was crying pitifully. When she saw her father, she immediately cried and reached out to Eric. Eric hurriedly carried his daughter and glared at his daughter, who was already sticking her tongue out. Recalling what happened earlier, he reached out and took out the book that Drew seemed to have inadvertently hidden behind his back. He took a look and saw that it was Stephen King's thriller novel, The Witch Carrie. Curious and amused, Eric threw the book aside and reached out to pinch the girl's little ear. Ouch. It hurts. Joan said that Shashya likes to listen to people reading to her before she goes to bed. That's why I read it. Besides, Shashya might not understand it. I only read a few pages. Eric tightened his grip a little and smiled. You're scaring her to tears. You still don't understand? Did your mother read The Witch Carrie to you when you were young? Who would read to me? I was only 6 months old when she took me out to shoot commercials to make money. No one celebrated my birthday with me. No one read me fairy tales before I went to bed. I didn't have a comfortable single room either. Sob sob. I'm a child who didn't have a childhood. Sob sob. I'm so pitiful. Although he knew that the girl was 99% pretending, Eric still let go of his hand with pity. Looking at the girl who instantly stopped crying and wrapped around him like a koala, Eric helplessly patted her back. Don't read horror novels to Shashya in the future. You'll scare her. Okay. Virginia had coaxed her son to sleep. When she heard the commotion, she walked over. She leaned against the door and looked at Drew, who was rubbing against Eric. Amused, she asked, "What are you guys doing?" The girl wasn't shy in front of outsiders. She continued to cling on to Eric. Eric could only pass the Hawaiian to Virginia and smile. You coax the little one. I'll coax the big one. Haha. Virginia smiled and took the Hawaiian. The scary sounds were gone. It was already late at night. The Hawaiian quickly closed its eyes while leaning on Virginia. Eric freed his hands and patted the girl on his body. Okay, let me go. It's time to sleep. Carry me to the bedroom. Eric hugged the girl's little body and smiled. You seem to have gained a lot of weight. I can't carry you. No, I'm not even 100 pounds. You can touch me if you don't believe me. Virginia carefully placed the Hawaiian on the crib and checked the baby monitor. Then, she smiled and said to the two of them, Shashya is asleep. Don't mess around here. Eric had no choice but to pick up the lass and walk out amidst a burst of coquettish laughter. The next afternoon, Emily angrily called Eric. She first scolded the LTD board of directors for being a bunch of short-sighted idiots. Then, she said that LTD had chosen Eric's second option, which was to sell the copyright of the Victoria's Secret annual fashion show to Firefly. After that, Eric heard from Chris that Emily had a big argument with the LTD board of directors because of this. LTD was basically snatched by Chris from Leslie Wexney and other shareholders through a hostile takeover. Although Leslie Wexney had already left, many shareholders and management who were originally inclined to Leslie Wexney were still working in the company. These people were the operating pillars of LTD. Emily couldn't kick them all out on the premise that it wouldn't cause any turmoil. However, Eric believed that after the Victoria's Secret annual fashion show was released, Emily's position would be completely consolidated as the value of the Victoria's Secret brand increased. Only then would they be able to completely control the company. Since LTD had made a choice, the cooperation negotiations did not take too long. 3 days later, Eric took a few hours out of his busy schedule to sign the cooperation agreement. Eric then took the time to draft a plan and handed it to the team formed by LTD and Firefly to begin the early stages of preparation. As for ABC, after signing the acquisition contract, the two sides finally completed the merger process in late April. The first shareholders' meeting of the brand new Firefly Group was held on April 26. Although Eric still held more than 70% of the shares and had absolute control of Firefly, even after the merger, Firefly still had dozens of shareholders. The establishment of a board of directors was inevitable. Eric originally intended to set up a 5-person pocket-sized board of directors, but Buffett, Tom Murphy, and the original ABC shareholders insisted on at least 3 board seats. According to the shareholding ratio, Eric had no choice but to expand the board to the size of 11 people that was common in large North American companies. Among them, the original ABC shareholders included Warren Buffett of Berkshire, Tom Murphy, the current CEO of ABC, and David West, the president of State Street Global, who supported the merger. On Firefly's side, except for Eric, who was the chairman of the board of directors, the rest were basically senior executives of Firefly. Although everyone unanimously suggested that Eric hire a few independent directors so that they could judge Firefly's decision-making from a bystander's point of view, and at the same time provide Firefly with some contacts and information resources, federal law did not require non-listed companies to hire independent directors. Eric also did not want Firefly's internal operations to be exposed to irrelevant people, so he rejected the suggestion. After the establishment of the board of directors, the next step was to adjust the management and streamline the department. Michael Lynn's contract was about to expire. Originally, Firefly only needed to pay a symbolic compensation, and Michael Lynn could give up the position of the group's CEO to Katzenberg in advance. He would only be a director in name. However, the summer was coming. Katzenberg had been focusing on the merger of ABC. The main distribution work of Firefly's summer movies was all handled by Michael Lynn and Jeffrey. In the next few months, due to the need to streamline and adjust the ABC department, it was impossible for Katzenberg to turn his energy back to the movie business. In order to ensure that the release of the summer movies was foolproof, not only could Michael Lynn's contract not be terminated in advance, but it had to be extended to September. Fortunately, the two sides had reached a tacit understanding. There was no need for any wrangling over these matters. A simple contract was confirmed. On ABC's side, Tom Murphy was 69 years old. Originally, after completing this merger, Tom Murphy could retire and enjoy his old age. However, in order to avoid the turmoil of ABC's merger in the 1980s, Tom Murphy would continue to be the CEO of ABC until the end of next year. Fortunately, Eric did not need to know ABC deeply to find the right candidate for the next CEO of ABC, Robert Iger. After all, Robert Iger's personal ability had been proven in his previous life. Eric personally talked to Robert Iger several times and obtained the approval of Tom Murphy and others. This matter was confirmed internally in ABC. In addition, Jeffrey, who had celebrated his 60th birthday last year, also planned to retire from the position of the company's president. The old man remembered the difficult experience when he and his wife made movies together. He planned to use his annual equity dividends from Firefly Pictures to set up a film fund after leaving office, while running the small farm in Maryland, to support some young directors to fulfill their film dreams. Although Eric felt that Jeffrey would most likely squander a lot of money by doing this, Jeffrey obviously did not care much about money. Chris also expressed his support for his father's actions, so Eric did not say anything more. The final confirmed adjustment result was that after Tom Murphy and Michael Lynn retired one after another, Katzenberg would serve as the CEO of Firefly Group, responsible for the overall operation and development of the group. Robert Iger would serve as the president of Firefly Group and the CEO of ABC Television Network, responsible for the affairs of ABC Television Network. Frank Wales would serve as the president of Firefly Group and the CEO of Disney, responsible for the affairs of the subsidiary Disney. The three of them formed the triumvirate of Firefly Group. At the same time, after the department adjustment, the heads of the various departments of Firefly Group would also be adjusted accordingly. Although Eric was the chairman of the board of directors, his main energy was still focused on the film production of Firefly. Unless Katzenberg and others made a decision that was completely contrary to the development of the film industry in the next 10 years, Eric did not intend to interfere with the company's daily operations. Chapter 604. ABC Headquarters, Upper West Side, Manhattan, 66th Street. In the multimedia screening room, Dr. Mark, played by Anthony Edwards, was once again woken up at 6:30 in the morning. He looked at his watch and sat up tiredly in the small storage room. The 87-minute pilot episode of Emergency Room Stories had officially ended. The lights were turned on, and there was a lot of discussion in the screening room. Eric heard some people from ABC say things like too many medical terms, unpopular theme, messy structure, not enough conflict in the plot, and so on. He just smiled faintly. He did not doubt the professionalism of these managers who had worked in the television industry for many years. However, this professionalism could only ensure that the TV program was above average. If the ratings of every TV series were in line with these people's expectations, there would not be any dark horses in the ratings. Tom Murphy, who was sitting next to Eric, whispered a few words to Buffett on the other side. Of course, he could also hear the discussion around him. He smiled and said to Eric, "Eric, don't mind what they say. I think this is a very good TV series. Relatively speaking, movies with unpopular themes are more eye-catching. Maybe there will be unexpected ratings." Eric, of course, did not mind. He nodded and asked Buffett's opinion of the TV series with a smile. "It's indeed a little too trivial," Buffett said, "but I don't think the plot is messy. After a little analysis, you can see that the characters of Dr. Mark, Dr. Doug, and the intern named John Carter are all arranged in a good way. I'm now looking forward to the next plot development." Katzenberg, Robert Iger, and others who were sitting nearby all expressed their opinions. Emergency Room Stories was personally directed by Eric. At least before Eric's first failure, no one would question Eric's vision. The broadcast of this TV series was also a foregone conclusion. This test screening was more like a relaxation after the completion of the merger between Firefly and ABC. It was already May 7th, and the North American summer vacation was just around the corner. The major personnel adjustments after the merger with ABC had also been completed. The next step was to streamline some departments that had overlapping functions between Firefly and ABC. Katzenberg still needed to continue to focus on this area for a few months, but Eric no longer needed to keep an eye on this side. Although there were many things waiting for Eric to deal with in Los Angeles, he had to take time to go to Boston and talk to the managers of the three companies in charge of the browser, Yahoo portal, and online mailbox. After a simple reception at the ABC headquarters restaurant at noon, Buffett and a group of people who had stayed in New York for a while for the acquisition began to gradually leave and return to the city where they originally worked and lived. Although a suitable successor had not been found for the time being, Eric still arranged for Alan Fisman, who had been with him for more than 5 years, to be the deputy general manager of ABC's primetime program department. After the merger of the two companies, Eric did not make a large-scale personnel transfer in ABC, which made many people feel relieved. Therefore, Eric parachuting a confidant into the core department of ABC did not cause any objection. After saying goodbye to Katzenberg and others who still had work to do in the afternoon, Eric pushed open the narrow glass door and walked out of the ABC headquarters building. Standing on the slightly narrow road of 66th Street, he endured the urge to look back at the red brick building that made him want to paste mosaics on it. He patiently waited for the driver to drive the car over. ABC originally had a very imposing headquarters building in Rockefeller Center in the 1980s, but after Buffett and Tom Murphy, two very thrifty old men, bought ABC, they sold ABC's property in Rockefeller Center to the Japanese at a high price in order to save money. It was the acquisition of Rockefeller Center that caused a wave of anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States in the 1980s. After that, Tom Murphy chose the Upper West Side, a crowded area that was not yet bustling, to build a new headquarters building. The driver quickly drove the car over. More than 10 minutes later, Eric got out of the car outside a coffee shop near Bryant Park in Midtown. It was working hours, so there were not many people in the coffee shop. Without the waiter's guidance, Eric saw Tina Brown sitting by the window on the left. Last month, Elizabeth gave Eric the contact information of the former editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair, but it was not until recently that Eric made an appointment with Tina Brown. Tina Brown was just in her early 40s. She was wearing a very simple white shirt and had short hair. She was neither as flamboyant as Anna Wintour nor as strong as Emily. Instead, she was more like a housewife. However, as long as one knew Tina Brown, no one would doubt this 25-year-old woman who was the editor-in-chief of the century-old British magazine, Gossip. Tina Brown also noticed Eric's appearance. She waved to the waiter who was walking towards Eric and got up to greet him personally. "Hello, Mr. Williams, nice to meet you." Tina Brown came in front of Eric and extended her hand to Eric generously. Eric shook hands with her and said, "Nice to meet you too, Ms. Brown, but I seem to be late." Tina Brown brought Eric to the seat just now and smiled, "Of course not, I've been coming here every afternoon for a while recently, so I'm early. Eric sat opposite Tina Brown and noticed that there was an IBM laptop in front of Tina Brown. It was even plugged in with a phone line. Beside it was an introductory computer tutorial and a black laptop. He could not help but take a few more glances at them. Tina Brown noticed Eric's confusion and turned the laptop page to face Eric. She smiled. "The owner of the coffee shop is my friend, so I can use the internet here. I've been studying the Yahoo website for the past few days, and I happen to have a lot of questions that I hope to get answers from you, Mr. Williams." When Eric made an appointment with her, he did not hide his intention to invite her for a meeting. After hearing Tina Brown's explanation, he said, "Of course, no problem. Feel free to ask me if you have any questions. Also, call me Eric. You don't mind me calling you Tina, right?" "Of course not," Tina Brown nodded. Just when she was about to say something, Eric gestured to the laptop that displayed Yahoo's homepage and said, "This isn't Yahoo's latest homepage. Can I use it?" Tina Brown pushed the laptop over. Eric casually asked for a cup of coffee from the waiter who walked over. He then turned to the laptop and skillfully entered a website. A brand new homepage that was completely different from Yahoo's homepage just now appeared on the browser. The original Yahoo's homepage had the simplest T-shaped layout. The entire page was divided into 3 sections according to the T-shaped dividing line. The brand new homepage had the typical, same, layout. The subsequent classic portals basically used this layout. It could be said that it was a successful model that had been verified by time. This was also the plan that Eric had discussed repeatedly with the Yahoo team over email recently. However, the new homepage was still in the internal testing stage. Compared to the portal homepage in his memory that had to be scrolled down for a long time to reach the bottom, the current homepage was designed to be only the size of a monitor due to the internet speed limit. The top of the page was still Yahoo's homepage icon and search bar. On the left was a series of column links. The login interface, email, Yahoo Forum, and the upcoming instant messaging tool were moved to the right. In the middle of the same was the recommended news content. On the top of the original news content, Eric initially planned to add a website recommendation section based on the URL navigation. However, these super traffic entry points would definitely be able to charge based on the advertising effect in the future. According to Yahoo's expected traffic, these advertising slots would bring in a huge amount of revenue for Yahoo annually in the next few years. However, it was undoubtedly wishful thinking to charge some websites for advertising fees now. Since he could not get any money, Eric would rather cancel this section temporarily. After all, the navigation section would only be free now. As everyone knew, it was extremely difficult to change from a free to a paid model on the internet. Eric opened the internal testing interface and turned the laptop screen to a position where both of them could see it. He pointed at the news, finance, and entertainment sections links on the left as well as the recommended news in the middle and said to Tina Brown, "If you're willing to be the editor-in-chief of Yahoo, these content sections will be your future work targets. The recommended news in the middle is just like the recommended content of every issue on the magazine cover. Every subsection is very similar to the sub-column pages of the magazine," Eric said as he opened the entertainment section casually and gave a simple introduction. Tina Brown listened to Eric's explanation patiently before raising her head to look at him. She smiled and said, "Eric, why do you think I'm qualified for this job?" Eric shook his head and said, "I can't confirm this, Tina. This is a brand new industry that has never been done before. Therefore, I can only look for someone who can take this position from the traditional media industry. Someone just happened to recommend you to me. After some understanding, I think you're indeed a good candidate. However, Yahoo doesn't have much time for you to adapt to this job. You can only get a 1-year contract. If your work is not satisfactory within a year, you'll have to leave." Tina Brown frowned slightly when she heard these harsh conditions. As a strong woman who had dominated the magazine industry for nearly 20 years, even the senior management of Vanity Fair's parent company, Condé Nast, would not speak to her in such an unreasonable tone. However, Tina Brown swallowed the words that she wanted to refute when she thought of Eric's identity. The position of this young man in front of her in the media industry was definitely far beyond any senior management of Condé Nast. Not to mention that he also had such a shocking amount of wealth. In the Western society, wealth represented real power. After sorting out her emotions, Tina Brown said, "Eric, it's rumored that you've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in the browser software, Yahoo, and online email service. I just want to know how you plan to recover these investments. Although you're rich, it's absolutely impossible to sustain a pure investment without any profit in any industry. Yahoo's user base is already very large. The company is developing a unique advertising system. These projects are still in a confidential state. You can only know the details after you sign the contract with Yahoo." Yahoo and email service had been testing simple banner ads and email ads on a small scale before this. Tina Brown had also discovered these when she was studying Yahoo's website these few days. However, she did not think that these seemingly inconspicuous advertising actions could cover the huge expenses of the website. However, since Eric was unwilling to reveal the details in advance, Tina Brown could only ask other questions. What about the content? Eric, Yahoo uses the method of reprinting content from other websites. There's not much original content. However, I think that the content on the internet is still very scarce. If this continues, Yahoo will soon fall into a development bottleneck. Of course, I've also considered this, Eric said with a faint confident smile. Although this is also in the next step of Yahoo's development plan, I can disclose some things to you in advance. Starting from the second half of the year, Yahoo will set up a special angel investment fund to support the further development of those websites with potential. The initial investment scale is about $100 million. This money will be spent completely within a year. According to the average investment scale of $1 million per website, Yahoo will support about 100 new websites. In the future, as long as it's necessary, I don't mind burning $100 million every year to do this. In addition to these, you also need to set up NetEase's own content editing department. As long as your idea is sufficiently feasible, I don't mind investing enough money. Burning $100 million every year to support the development of websites. The moment she heard this data, Tina Brown's first reaction was that this legendary young man in front of her must be crazy. Although there were hundreds of thousands of websites of various sizes on the internet now, it was not an exaggeration to say that only 1 in 10,000 could really make a profit. Most of the websites were either introduction websites of some companies or small websites that were created by some people out of interest. The number of official commercial websites was still very few. From Tina Brown's point of view, Eric spending so much money was no different from throwing gold coins down the drain. Eric noticed Tina Brown's fleeting expression and smiled. When Columbus proposed the Great Voyage, many people thought that he was crazy. However, he still chose to go on a long journey. Because of this, we can now sit on this continent where he landed and discuss another crazy plan of a suspected lunatic, isn't it? Chapter 605. A few years later, when the internet industry began to explode, Tina Brown realized how far-sighted Eric's decision back then was when she saw countless companies burning hundreds of millions of dollars every year but still couldn't shake the internet empire that was easily built by a young man who was not even 25 years old. But now, in an exquisite cafe in Manhattan, Tina Brown heard about Eric's crazy plan for the first time. She was more hesitant than anything else. Tina Brown's position and reputation in the media industry had reached the peak. If she accepted Condé Nast Group's invitation to take charge of The New Yorker, she had a 90% chance of reviving this declining magazine with the nearly 20 years of experience she had accumulated in the operation of the magazine. However, if she transferred to a completely unfamiliar field, even if it was only for a year, it wouldn't be easy for her to reintegrate into her original circle when she returned a year later if she didn't achieve any outstanding results in this field. She was only 40 years old now. She didn't want to ruin her successful career just because of one adventure. Hearing Eric mentioning Columbus and the Great Voyage, Tina Brown didn't feel too excited. She just smiled faintly and agreed with him. People only remembered the glory of the Great Voyage era, but no one had investigated how many adventurers had died at sea because of storms, pirates, and diseases in the hundreds of years. Tina Brown thought Eric would continue to persuade her to join Yahoo, or give her a generous offer that she couldn't refuse. She thought that he would definitely do that with her brilliant experience that she had accumulated for more than 20 years in the media industry. A truly successful leader would usually spare no effort to win over talents for his own use. However, Eric became quiet after he finished his last sentence. He picked up the coffee in front of him and leaned back comfortably on the chair, patiently waiting for her to make a decision. Eric's unexpected reaction calmed Tina Brown, who was originally worried about her gains and losses. The two of them quietly watched the traffic outside the window for a while. Tina Brown finally made up her mind and asked, "Eric, what can I get if I join Yahoo?" Eric answered, "I won't give you a high annual salary. Your personal salary will probably be the same as when you were in Vanity Fair." However, when Yahoo was first established, the company drafted an equity reward contract. Before it went public, Yahoo will give up to 20% of its equity as a reward to the management and some employees who have made important contributions according to their contributions. If you join Yahoo and meet my requirements after a year, you will be included in this reward plan. Tina Brown shook her head in confusion. "Eric, what you said is too general. I don't know if you'll fulfill your promise in the future." If Yahoo can really develop and grow, 20% of the shares is not a small amount. Moreover, you didn't give me any criteria. I don't know how to meet your requirements. Eric smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about that. A good friend and business partner of mine personally drafted the share reward plan before the listing. There are dozens of pages in the contract and it has been approved by everyone. After you join Yahoo, you can sign the contract." For a media giant like Firefly, which had established its position in the industry, the group's operating system was quite perfect. Although an outstanding management could bring more benefits to the company, it could not decide the life and death of the company. Therefore, shareholders did not need to give too many equity rewards to the management. In the past few years, although Firefly's profits were very high, the equity Eric used to reward the management was less than 1% of the company's total equity. However, for the rapidly rising internet industry, the accumulation of a lot of industry experience in advanced technology and management personnel was very important to the company's development. Under the situation of the company's rapid development, in order to prevent the management from leaving the company or being poached by competitors, it was very necessary to win over the people's hearts by rewarding them. Because once these people who were crucial to the development of the internet technology company left, it might be like a high-speed train suddenly discovering that a section of the track in front of it was removed. The disastrous consequences could be imagined. The reason why there were so many young billionaires in the early days of the internet industry was that most investors understood this principle. They did not naively place their hopes on their passion and loyalty. However, after more than 10 years, when the internet industry's oligarchic structure was formed, the door of wealth that could make people rich overnight would also be closed. Other than a few lucky people, most of the internet companies that could come up with some new ideas could only accept the oligarch's offer of amnesty obediently. After explaining Tina Brown's first concern, Eric pointed to the IBM laptop that still showed the Yahoo portal's homepage and said, "Also, it's not that there's no evaluation standard for your personal work results. For example, Yahoo's server has a detailed record of the user's access data. There's a very important PV value, which means the user's page view. This data is the best reflection of the user's recognition of Yahoo's content. The ratio of the PV value to the number of users is the average page view per user. This ratio will represent your personal work results to a certain extent. The higher the ratio, the better your work is." After listening to Eric's patient explanation, Tina Brown suddenly smiled and said, "I suddenly realize that I can't seem to find a reason to reject this job. At least, you're more honest than my previous boss." Eric knew that Tina Brown's words were equivalent to her agreeing to the job. He smiled and said, "If that's the case, I need to be honest with you about one more thing. Compared to being the chief editor of Vanity Fair, your workload at Yahoo will increase exponentially. This is because Vanity Fair only needs to do one issue per month, but Yahoo's information needs to be updated every day or even every hour. Not only that, you'll need to coordinate all the content sections and even more subsections." Tina Brown was stunned for a moment before asking, "How many people do I have under me?" Yahoo spent most of its energy on website technology research for the past 2 years. Currently, it only has a simple editorial team of 50 people. The original chief editor used to be the chief editor of an ordinary newspaper in Boston. I'm very dissatisfied with his work, so I invited you, Eric said as he looked at IBM's Yahoo homepage. He counted and said, there will be a total of 8 content sections that you'll be responsible for in the future. After you're hired, you can also adjust according to the popularity of these content sections. As far as I'm concerned, there will be an average of 5 subsections in each section. If there are 5 editors in each section, you can expand the editorial team to 200 people. Yahoo will definitely produce its own news content. This will require a team of reporters. At the same time, there will also be logistic support and other departments. This is also a group of people. Of course, these are things that you'll have to consider after you're hired. If you feel that you need to expand the editorial team to 500 people, I'll approve your plan as long as you give me a convincing reason. Tina Brown subconsciously felt that 5 editors in each subsection was too little. However, she was not officially hired yet, so she did not know the specific situation. Therefore, she did not ask for anything immediately. Last question, Tina Brown said. Firefly Group is now the largest media group in North America. It has rich information content. I'd like to know, how much support can Yahoo get from Firefly? Eric smiled and said, I can give you all the support that you can think of. The top priority is movie and TV news, celebrity interviews, sports news on ESPN, the latest trends in Hollywood, and so on. However, the premise is that you have to let the departments under Firefly feel that you're qualified to work with them. When they hear about working with Yahoo, their first reaction should be, oh, Yahoo, that's a great website, instead of asking, what is Yahoo? With a puzzled look. There's an endless loop in your logic, Tina Brown smiled and said, if Yahoo can't get enough support first, how can I let others treat the website differently? Eric said, although you're changing the concept a little, alright, I have a good opportunity here. Just like the time when you used the Reagan couple's Foxtrot incident to revive Vanity Fair, this will be another big event that may cause a sensation. If it's done well, Yahoo's reputation will be greatly improved again. Tina Brown recalled the box office hit Jurassic Park that caused a sensation last year. She asked curiously, is it your new movie? No, Eric shook his head and said, but it's another show that I'm directing personally. It's a grand fashion show. Tina Brown still wanted to ask, but Eric just smiled and shook his head. This will be the end of the year. It's not convenient to disclose a lot of things in advance. But believe me, the news that this fashion show will bring is enough for Yahoo to operate for a few months, and I'll try to provide you with all the first-hand information. Then I can only wait and see. Tina Brown smiled slightly and reached out her hand to Eric across the coffee table. Eric shook hands with her and said, my flight is in the morning the day after tomorrow. Let's go to Boston to see where you'll be working in the future, okay? Of course, Tina Brown said. Even if you don't invite me, I'll go there personally before I start work. In Eric's plan, this trip to Boston was crucial to his layout in the internet industry. He originally hoped that Chris could go to Boston with him, but Chris needed to fly to Finland to attend Nokia's board meeting. As Eric's investment agent, Chris held the board positions of many companies including Nokia, Cisco, and AOL. Eric's personal work schedule was also quite tight. He couldn't arrange the time, so he had to give up on the plan of going with him. In the end, Eric only brought 2 attendants and Tina Brown to board the plane to Boston. Before leaving, Eric had personally called 2 other people, John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco Corporation, and Steve Case, the CEO of AOL, to invite them. The other party had also readily agreed. The small Gulfstream business plane under the Firefly Group slowly landed at Boston General Edward International Airport. Eric and Tina Brown got off the plane together. When they walked out of the airport, they saw 3 men of different ages walking towards them. The 3 of them were the head of the browser company, Ian Neer, the head of the Yahoo website, Jeff Locke, and the head of the online mail company, Steve Mitnick, who occasionally chatted with Eric on the internet. Ian Neer was originally a product development department manager of the database software giant Oracle. He was in his early 40s, tall but somewhat bald. He wore a neat gray suit. Jeff Locke was recommended by Tim Berners-Lee to be the head of the Yahoo portal. He was in his 30s and had a master's degree in computer science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He had also worked at Sun Software for 2 years. The last one was Steve Mitnick, who was in charge of the online mail service. He was Chris' classmate at the University of Pennsylvania. Although his parents had arranged for him to major in finance like Chris, he was very obsessed with computer technology. In the end, he did not get a degree in finance. However, his research on computer and information technology had reached the point where the computer science professor at the University of Pennsylvania was amazed. The professor at the University of Pennsylvania even wanted Steve Mitnick to be his student. However, he rejected the suggestion on the grounds that Steve Mitnick had nothing to teach him. According to Chris, Steve Mitnick had been hanging around in a small company run by his father in his hometown in Dallas. When he heard Chris say that someone was willing to spend a lot of money to research the computer technology that he was interested in, he immediately threw everything aside and came to Boston. The group of people introduced themselves to each other. When they were about to leave, Steve Mitnick naturally pulled Eric into his inconspicuous black Buick sedan. Tina Brown seemed to want to talk to the head of Yahoo immediately, so she got into Jeff Locke's car. Carter Moan and Eric's other bodyguard got into Ian Neer's Mercedes-Benz. "Eric, I have a good idea recently, and I'm sure you'll be very interested in it," Steve Mitnick said eagerly as the Buick entered the airport highway. Now, in order to adapt to Windows, Unix, Linux, and Apple's personal computer operating systems, several different versions of IE have to be developed at the same time. I think, why don't we develop a network operating system based on IE? With the advantage of our browser software, we might be able to surpass Microsoft in the future. Besides, I've recently written a simple system kernel. As long as you agree to this plan, I promise that I'll come up with a brand new system in 2 years. Oh no, a year and a half. Eric retracted his gaze from the red building of the Hilton Hotel near the airport highway and sized up Steve Mitnick's suit that clearly didn't fit him. He said with a smile, "You should have discussed this plan with Ian, right?" Chapter 606. Steve Mitnick said, "Yes, but he said the plan was too expensive and you would never agree to it. But I think the thing you don't lack the most now is money, right?" "Indeed, I don't lack the money," Eric said with a smile. Although Firefly Group had just issued a huge amount of bonds worth $8 billion, as long as Eric needed money, he believed that all the banks in the United States would not refuse to provide a huge loan to Eric. "But what we lack is time. Computer operating systems have been developed for more than 10 years, and there are many mature operating systems in the market. Moreover, compared to developing a new operating system, it is obviously easier to bypass our software patents and develop a new web browser. Since we have achieved an unparalleled position in this field, it is unwise to give up our advantages and switch to other industries." In fact, the most important reason Eric did not say and could not say was that Microsoft was going to launch the epic-making Windows 95 operating system next year. The release of Win 95 meant that Microsoft would unify the operating system industry. Launching another operating system at that time would definitely be of little value. If it was 5 years earlier, Eric would definitely not hesitate to agree to Steve Mitnick's plan and use the advantages of browser software to develop a web-based operating system. Netscape, which had developed the first successful graphical interface browser in the original spacetime, had proposed an operating system based on the Netscape browser, and this plan was aborted because of the rise of Win 95. Later, Google had also planned to develop a free operating system based on the Google browser, but after the news was released, there was no follow-up. It was obvious that after Win 95, it was impossible to shake Microsoft's position in the PC era. Steve Mitnick nodded disappointedly. "It seems that what you said makes sense." Eric smiled. Although Steve Mitnick was a technical genius, he was still somewhat idealistic. However, such a person was purer, just like the two founders of Google in the original spacetime. Eric could conclude that at least Steve Mitnick would put more energy into technology research and development, and would not spend so much effort to make money. In fact, Eric felt that the more one concentrated on something, the more they would gain. Actually, you should have guessed it already. Eric waited for a while before taking the initiative to say, I'm here to integrate all three companies into one and form Yahoo Incorporated, IE, and Hotmail will also be officially renamed as Yahoo Browser and Yahoo Mail. Steve, are you interested in being the CEO of this company? No, Eric. Steve Mitnick immediately shook his head. You can make me sit in front of a computer screen for the rest of my life, but if you want me to sit in an office or a conference room every day like those company managers, I'll go crazy. After a pause, Steve Mitnick said, You'd better let Ian do it. He's obviously better at running a company. Maybe I can be Yahoo's CTO. Eric was a little surprised. Then he smiled and said, I've always thought that you and the other Steve I know are quite similar, but now it seems that the two of you are completely different. The other Steve was, of course, Steve Jobs. Jobs was a very controlling person, and the guy in front of him was more inclined to be a technology maniac who did not care about what was going on outside. You mean Steve Jobs? Mitnick turned the steering wheel to pass a white commercial vehicle and followed closely behind the two cars in front. He said with a reminiscing look, I bought a Macintosh when I was at Penn University. At that time, it was really a great personal computer. The graphical user platform, the first multimedia features, and the 8 MHz processor speed were far superior to the IBM personal computer of that time. Unfortunately, after Steve Jobs left, Apple did not come out with anything good in the past few years. More than half an hour later, the three cars stopped in front of a white 6-story office building on the other side of the Charles River near the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. After talking along the way, Eric had pretty much given up on letting Steve Mitnick, a computer genius who only cared about technology, manage Yahoo. Although Steve Mitnick had a very high IQ, he had no intention of managing a company at all. Forcing it would only backfire. Except for a few stores on the bottom floor of the office building, the top 5 floors were all occupied by the three companies. At present, the three companies had a total of nearly 900 employees. Eric, led by Steve Mitnick and the other two supervisors, began to greet the employees in the open work areas on each floor. Walking into the office area on the second floor, although this office building was very spacious, the density of less than 200 employees on each floor was not high. However, with a large number of office equipment, personal computers, and other equipment, it looked a lot more messy and crowded. However, when they saw Eric, the big boss behind the scenes, appear, all the employees seemed to be in high spirits. Some of the bolder female employees even found a camera and excitedly pulled Eric to take a series of photos together. They went all the way to a lounge on the top floor. Eric sat down at a round table and said to the others with a smile, When I first went to Pixar Studios, all the employees of Pixar were gathered in a very dilapidated and crowded office building, but now Pixar has its own 16-acre exclusive office park in San Francisco's Emeryville City. I believe that the future achievements of the companies in your hands will far exceed Pixar's, so all of this is only temporary. The three companies had been burning money for years and didn't have much income. Of course, Steve Mitnick and the others didn't dare to ask for a better office environment. Moreover, ever since they discovered the growing development potential of the three companies, they didn't care about such trivial matters as the office environment. Ian Neer, who was in charge of browser development, said, Eric, I think this place is already very good. So, why don't we take a look at the development results of IES? It's in my office. Your idea of translating languages into browsers is really genius. Once IES is released, I don't think anyone will be able to surpass IE in the browser field. When Jeff Locke and Steve Mitnick heard Ian Neer mention IES, they were eager to give it a try. Eric smiled and glanced at Tina Brown, who was at a loss. He shook his head and laughed. There's no need for that for now. Everyone has worked for me for more than 2 years. We have to show off. Do you know any place in Boston that can accommodate 900 people for a party? This time, it was the three men's turn to be at a loss. Tina Brown realized that she had not signed the employment contract yet, so Eric deliberately changed the topic that seemed to involve the company's secrets. She did not mind. As the most famous vanity planner after the Oscar ceremony, Tina Brown was obviously the most experienced in this kind of thing. She smiled and said, Eric, if you want to arrange a party for 900 people at once, it's best to hold an open-air party. The location can only be chosen in a nearby park. I happen to know the phone number of the owner of the biggest party company in Boston. They can contact the corresponding party venue on their behalf. But if you want to do it tonight, it will cost more to urgently contact the party venue and arrange all kinds of drinks, food, and other facilities. Eric smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you to contact them, Tina." Tina Brown smiled and said, "All right, as you wish, boss." After saying that, she looked at Ian Neer and the other two. "Can you lend me your phone?" "Follow me, madam." Ian Neer took the initiative to stand up and led Tina Brown into an office. After arranging a staff gathering in the evening and having lunch together, Eric and Tina Brown returned to the hotel together. They found a coffee shop in the afternoon. Eric let Tina Brown go through some of the prepared documents, including the extremely long stock incentive contract. After making sure that she had no doubts, Tina Brown finally signed an agreement and officially joined Yahoo as the chief content editor. Looking at the Massachusetts Avenue that connected MIT and Harvard downstairs through the glass window of the hotel suite, both sides of the street were buildings of different heights and ages that would drive people with obsessive-compulsive disorder crazy. Compared to the metropolis in the memory of his previous life where tens of millions of people would gather if he did not pay attention, the total population of the entire Boston region in a radius of several hundred kilometers was less than 5 million. The permanent resident population in the urban area was only a mere 600,000. Perhaps it was because of this that the municipal planning appeared to be so unhurried, with a strong sense of chaos. As the boss, even though he was very careful in the face of 900 enthusiastic employees at the party in Boston Park on the other side of the Charles River last night, he was still carried back to the hotel in a drunken state. His head was still a little swollen. Eric stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the downtown area of Cambridge that was shrouded in the morning sun. He stretched his body while letting his imagination run wild before walking out of the room to eat in the restaurant. Seeing Eric walking into the restaurant, Tina Brown, who was eating by the window, nodded at him. She waited for Eric to walk over before gesturing that she had almost finished her breakfast and said with a smile, "Try the Boston baked beans. Restaurants rarely serve this kind of food nowadays. I didn't expect to see it here." Boston had a nickname that was 10 times cuter than the Big Apple in New York. It was called Beanie City. It originated from the dish called Boston baked beans that Tina Brown had just cooked. Eric was not a Westerner who was used to sweet food. He politely declined this kind of food that was baked with syrup. He sat opposite Tina Brown and casually ordered a sandwich and a glass of juice. Tina Brown asked the waiter to take away her cutlery. She sat opposite him patiently and read today's newspaper. She waited for Eric to finish his breakfast before saying, "Eric, I hope to take over the editorial team of Yahoo as soon as possible. Also, the offices of the 3 companies that I saw yesterday were really scattered. It was difficult for me to concentrate on working in that kind of environment. I called and consulted some real estate agents yesterday. 2 floors of an office building on the same street happened to be vacant because the original company went bankrupt. I hope to rent that place." Eric nodded with a smile and said, "As I said, after you join the company, these are all things within your authority. However, there are still a lot of things that I need you to understand together, so there's no need to be in such a hurry. After I leave Boston, you can go all out." "A lot of things," Tina Brown repeated and said with a smile. "For example, about the IES yesterday?" "Yes, but that's only one part of it," Eric said. "The so-called IES is the code name of a computer language that the IE browser team and 2 other companies started to develop at the end of last year. The full name is IE Script. This is a completely new scripting language that is different from traditional programming languages. Simply put, for example, the IE browser software is mainly written in the C language. However, the C language code written by the programmers can't be recognized by the computer. It needs to be compiled by special software and converted into a language that the computer can recognize and execute. The new IES scripting language omits the compilation process. Web page programmers can directly write this language into the web page code, and then the IE browser can directly translate it. The IE scripting language was a design idea that Eric proposed to Ian Neer and the others based on his memory of JavaScript developed by the Netscape browser company. For the top computer technology talents like Ian Neer, Jeff Locke, and Steve Mitnick, some vague hints from Eric were enough for them to design the new IES scripting language by analogy. Although Tina Brown didn't know much about computers, she still understood Eric's explanation. However, she still had some doubts. Eric, what is the function of this scripting language? The main function of this scripting language is to make the originally static web pages dynamically change. Let's give a simple example. For example, web advertisements. The current Yahoo web page can only embed a fixed advertisement in various web pages with different content. Although the content of the advertisements on different pages can be manually adjusted, in the face of millions of web pages in the future, it's unrealistic to achieve a complete manual operation. However, with the IES scripting language, we can more accurately place the corresponding advertisements on different web pages with different content. Through dynamic code recognition, the movie information web page can automatically place movie advertisements, and the sports news web page can appear sports advertisements. Speaking up to this point, Eric took a sip of juice and gave Tina Brown some time to think before continuing. Of course, this isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is that the IES scripting language will be made available to web developers for free. This language is also very easy to learn for those who have the technical foundation. In 1 to 2 years, there won't be another scripting language in the industry. This plan, together with the $100 million Yahoo Angel Fund that I told you about, will be used to fund the development of content websites. 2 years of rapid promotion will be enough to establish the standard format for IES web development. We have the patents for IES and Internet Explorer, so in the future, all websites designed using the IES scripting language can only be recognized by Internet Explorer. I think you should understand what this means, right? Chapter 607. Of course, Tina Brown knew what this meant. Standards meant monopoly, and monopoly meant huge profits. This was a truth that had been proven countless times. Although governments around the world were clamoring against monopolies, and there were countless anti-monopoly investigations every year, in fact, monopolies were everywhere, and it was also the ultimate goal of countless enterprises. Tina Brown was even slightly excited when she thought that she might have the opportunity to participate in a brand new monopoly industry. In the next week, Eric started the merger of the 3 companies without stopping. He finally decided that Ian Neer, the person in charge of the original Internet browser company, would be the CEO of the merged Yahoo Internet company. Jeff Locke would be the COO, and he would still be mainly responsible for the operation of Yahoo's website. Steve Mitnick got the position of CTO as he wished, and he would be responsible for all the technology development projects of Yahoo Internet Company in the future. Tina Brown would be the editor-in-chief of Yahoo's information department. The original Internet browser, Hotmail, and other online services would be gradually renamed to Yahoo Browser and Yahoo Email within the next month. The upcoming instant messaging software would also be named Yahoo Chatroom, or YCR for short. Once the main management framework of Yahoo Internet Company was set up, Chris flew back to the United States from Finland and immediately rushed to Boston. Eric picked Chris up from the airport. The two of them did not go to the hotel, but went directly to Yahoo's headquarters to attend the first executive meeting after the company's reorganization. Recently, perhaps it was because of Eric's arrival, Yahoo's headquarters seemed to be a lot cleaner. Of course, Eric also knew that the real reason was that there was an additional woman in the management of the 3 men. Tina Brown's position in Yahoo Internet Company was second only to Ian Neer, and the same as Jeff Locke and Steve Mitnick. Although it was confirmed that Yahoo's content editing department would not work in the headquarters, the distance between the 2 offices was only a few hundred meters. Compared to the 3 men who did not care about trifles, Tina Brown could not tolerate the slightly messy office environment of Yahoo. Therefore, she personally arranged the logistics and cleaning work. Eric and Chris walked side by side up the neat stairs to the conference room on the top floor. Along the way, they talked about Nokia. Chris asked, "Didn't you invite John Chambers and Steve Keys? Are they here?" Eric said, "Of course it's because I've already made the arrangements here. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I can convince them to join this plan. They'll all be here tomorrow." Chris said, "If they don't join the plan, I think they will regret it in the future. There's no problem with Cisco." We're still Cisco's biggest shareholder, and that plan is definitely beneficial to Cisco. John Chambers has no reason to disagree. But I'm not sure about AOL. Eric shook his head with a smile and said, although I hope that AOL can focus on being an internet service provider, many of AOL's services overlap with Yahoo. They even imitated Yahoo to launch an AOL portal. It won't be easy to convince Steve Case to withdraw from competing with Yahoo. Steve Case is a smart man. He'll definitely understand what's best for AOL's development. Eric shrugged with a smile and said, smart people are often very stubborn. They pushed the door open and walked into the conference room. Ian Neer and the others, who were talking in low voices, stopped chatting and got up to greet Chris. Today's meeting was very important to the future development of Yahoo. The confidentiality level was also the highest. The second-tier company executives were not qualified to participate in the meeting. Including Eric and Chris, there were only 6 people in the conference room. Eric knew all the details of today's meeting and had thought about it countless times. He didn't rely on any documents. After they sat down, Eric walked to the writing board in front of the conference room and wrote 2 simple sentences on the board with a pen. Okay, Eric put down the pen, clapped his hands and said, although many of you have more or less understood the content of today's meeting, today, you will hear the complete picture of Yahoo's future development plan. Eric tapped the 2 sentences on the board and continued, in the next few years, or the next decade, all of Yahoo's development will be carried out around these 2 plans: Yahoo Technology Alliance and Yahoo Advertising Alliance. First of all, Yahoo's Technology Alliance. After more than 2 years of unremitting technology investment, Yahoo has obtained the absolute leading technology reserve in the industry. We have successfully launched Yahoo's portal, browser software, and online email service, 3 successful products that have changed the habits of internet users. We will launch more products in the future. But at the same time, if we are satisfied with just this, it will be a very stupid idea. It is difficult to maintain a technological lead for a long time. So, in order to maintain Yahoo's position as the absolute leader in the future, we need to promote the internet technology developed by Yahoo. We need to attract more companies and more users to Yahoo's technology standards. As long as Yahoo becomes the industry's technology standard, we can form an invincible alliance and crush all potential competitors in the bud. If Eric's words were recorded, in the future, when Yahoo encountered an antitrust investigation, it would definitely be an explosive and irrefutable piece of evidence. However, the people in the conference room were obviously not selfless advocates of the spirit of sharing the internet. Ian Neer and the others had a fanatical look in their eyes when they heard Eric's undisguised ambition. In the next year, the browser software-based IES scripting language, the new MP3 audio technology, and GIF image format will be Yahoo's first batch of technology promotion projects and will be licensed to the industry for free. Firefly Investment Company will provide more funds for the research and development of user internet multimedia technology. I hope that Yahoo can become the world's first high-tech company to successfully launch dynamic image and even video playback technology on internet software. At the same time, the company will also launch the research and development of the online payment tool Yahoo Pay. Users can use this online payment tool to conduct any transaction through the internet, whether it is a virtual software purchase or a physical product transaction. I look forward to the future of all internet payment activities relying on the Yahoo Pay payment platform. It was the first time Eric revealed the idea of the Yahoo Pay tool. He noticed that Chris, Ian Neer, and the others in the audience turned to Steve Mitnick. Eric smiled and said, "Don't look at Steve. I only thought of the Yahoo Pay online payment tool recently. Before leaving Boston, I will write a simple proposal, but the specific technical research and development work will be jointly undertaken by you. I hope that you can produce a formal product within a year." Ian Neer asked, "This kind of online payment tool definitely needs to cooperate with physical banks. Will they be willing to cooperate with us?" Eric said, "You don't have to worry about this. I will follow up personally. As long as the platform you develop can ensure security and practicality, I can pull in enough bank partners for Yahoo." Steve Mitnick's eyes lit up as he rubbed his hands and said, "Eric, I have a good idea. Stop." Eric smiled and stopped Steve Mitnick from speaking. He said, "I don't know what you're trying to say, but I know that I definitely won't be able to understand your terms about encryption algorithms and software architecture. So, you should discuss it with Ian and the others after the meeting." Everyone suddenly laughed. Steve Mitnick also smiled and made a choking gesture at Eric. After the laughter, Jeff Locke, who was somewhat introverted, raised his hand. After receiving a nod from Eric, he said, "Eric, I think that if we really want to develop Yahoo Pay, we need to focus on an operating system platform. Although we have achieved browser software that runs on all the mainstream operating systems such as Windows, Linux, Unix, and macOS, security is definitely the first priority when it comes to user financial operations. The more platforms there are, the less secure it is." When Eric came into contact with computers in his previous life, Microsoft had already dominated the world. Like many ordinary people, he was used to Windows, so he really didn't consider the current situation. However, this was not a difficult choice. After pretending to think for a moment, Eric said, "Then let's start with the most popular operating system, Windows. The graphical interface operating system will definitely become the mainstream of personal computers, so we can directly give up on Unix, DOS, and other platforms. There's also no need to consider an open-source system like Linux." Ian Neer said, "What about Apple's macOS? Its popularity among ordinary users is second only to Windows. I think we can develop Yahoo Pay technology based on these two platforms at the same time." Apple currently sold more than 500,000 personal computers a year. Although it seemed insignificant compared to more than a decade later, the annual sales of personal computers in this era were only a few million. Apple already had a considerable market share, so it was not surprising that Ian Neer attached great importance to the Apple operating system. However, if history did not deviate too much, after the launch of the Windows 95 operating system next year, Apple's personal computer sales would experience a terrifying precipitous decline. The originally vibrant Apple would quickly slide to the edge of bankruptcy. Even after Steve Jobs' return, Apple would only be able to establish itself in the high-end PC field. At this time, it was not cost-effective to prioritize the development of the macOS platform with Windows. "We still have too many things to do. For Yahoo Pay, dividing our attention on two platforms at the same time will delay the overall development progress. Therefore, it's better to start with the Windows platform and accumulate enough technology and experience before launching products for other operating systems. It'll be very simple and the time can be shortened by a lot." I think what Eric said is very reasonable. However, in order to avoid the other platforms that we have no time to take care of being occupied by competitors in advance, I think Yahoo Pay might be able to merge with the instant messaging tool YCR. This way, at least we can ensure an absolute advantage in the user base. After Tina Brown finished speaking, she smiled and said, "Also, Eric, I think the name YCR is too uncreative." Eric smiled and said, "When everyone gets used to the name YCR, then there will be people who will automatically add all kinds of connotations to it." Many of the chat tools in the original Spacetime had nothing special about their names. After users gradually got used to it, they would automatically accept those names. Out of some small mischievous interests, it was quite interesting to create a brand new chat tool for short. Since Tina Brown voiced her support, Ian Neer and the others also realized the benefits of doing so and accepted the decision one by one. "Then, next is the Yahoo Advertising Alliance," Eric said. "The purpose of this plan is obvious, so I won't explain anything about the name." Amidst the faint laughter, Eric said in a slightly serious tone, "But this plan is related to the survival of Yahoo. Even if I don't ask for any returns, the amount of money I can invest in Yahoo is limited. If Yahoo can't survive through its own profits, then all of Yahoo's plans will become empty talk. Therefore, the Yahoo Advertising Alliance plan is more important than the Yahoo Technology Alliance plan. The current online environment is very similar to the early public television network. Users currently have no concept of paying for online content other than the internet access fee. The possibility of us charging users through premium content services is almost zero. Therefore, as the user scale continues to explode, the profitability of the website through advertising will become an inevitable means. Therefore, the next step for Yahoo must increase the development of advertising technology and achieve accurate and effective advertising. Let online advertising achieve advertising effects that are comparable to television advertising. Only then will corporate customers be willing to spend money to advertise on Yahoo. Tina Brown asked, Eric, you said, Yahoo advertising. What does alliance mean? The so-called alliance is, of course, an alliance with other websites on the internet. After all, Yahoo's platform is limited. Even if we have more than 1 million or 10 million pages of content in the future, Yahoo's content is still insignificant compared to the huge online space. On the internet, most websites don't have the ability to run advertisements. What we need to do is to unite these tens of thousands of small websites and run advertisements together. These small websites can also earn revenue through advertising. This is a win-win plan, and Yahoo will be the biggest winner. Chris had been quietly listening to Eric's explanation. At this moment, he couldn't help but ask for the first time, Eric, even if the alliance plan can be realized technically, is it really meaningful to unite these small websites that don't have much traffic? Chapter 608. When Eric heard Chris's question, he smiled faintly. He picked up a pen and drew a simple diagram of the long tail theory on the board. He said in a firm tone, Of course it's meaningful, and it's very significant. Everyone knows that there are many B-movie companies in Hollywood, right? Although they didn't know why Eric suddenly mentioned this, they still nodded. At the same time, they curiously looked at the simple diagram that Eric drew on the board. Eric drew the diagram of the long tail theory that companies like Google, Amazon, and Narrate relied on to survive in the original spacetime. He said, take some B-movies in Hollywood as an example. The revenue structure of B-movies is like this diagram. We can call it the long tail diagram. The head of this diagram represents the box office revenue of a B-movie that is lucky enough to be screened in theaters. This part of the revenue occupies most of the area of the long tail diagram. For a B-movie that usually costs only a few million or even a few 100,000 yuan to be screened in theaters, it can almost make a fortune. However, it's very difficult for most B-movies to be screened in theaters, so ordinary people often think that it's very difficult for B-movie companies to survive. However, this is not the case. Many B-movie companies live very well, and the law of their survival is like this diagram. As Eric spoke, he used a pen to cut vertically at the head of the long tail picture with a dotted line and drew a cross. Then, he continued to use vertical lines to quickly cut out areas on the tail area. As he marked, he explained, like in the picture, even if they can't get the biggest income from the head, they can still get an income equivalent to the head area through the distribution of videotapes in the market, the income from cable TV broadcasting rights, and the sales of copyrights in the vast overseas market. Moreover, as long as they have enough channels, the income from the overseas market is very rich. Think about it, a B-movie that costs $2 million USD can recover a large part of the cost in the United States, but in the vast overseas market, even if it's a package sale of all the copyrights, it can sell for 200,000 USD in the United Kingdom, 150,000 USD in France, then Italy, Germany, Spain, Portugal. After Europe, there's the equally vast Asian market, and even some relatively rich Latin American countries and African countries. These scattered revenues are enough for a small company to make a lot of money. At this point, Eric put aside the pen in his hand and looked at the few people present. He said, So, do you see anything? Chris revealed a thoughtful look, while Tina Brown, who was more familiar with Hollywood, retorted, Eric, I think that other than the 7 major Hollywood film companies, there are very few small B-movie companies that have such a wide range of channels as you said. The ideal situation that you mentioned doesn't seem to exist. But it's a fact that the production companies of famous B-movie producers like Roger Corman are doing very well in Hollywood through the distribution method I mentioned, isn't it? Eric smiled and said, Also, I'm just using an idealized example to demonstrate Yahoo's future profit model. As an outstanding finance graduate, Chris understood faster than the others and said, Eric, I think I know what you're trying to say. You're saying that if the sales channels of a product are large enough, then even if the profit brought by these channels is very insignificant, it will still become an amazing number when accumulated. Bingo! Eric raised his right hand and tried to snap his fingers, but he failed. He put down his arm amidst the chuckles of the few people and said, "Considering the current online environment, there are hundreds of thousands of websites of different sizes in the entire cyberspace. If we can develop a set of advertising distribution technology that is easy to operate and recognized by customers, and pull in 100,000 websites with good traffic to join the Yahoo Advertising Alliance, even if each website only brings us a negligible income of $10 per month, then Yahoo can earn a total of $1 million per month. Although this $1 million is still far from enough to cover Yahoo's current annual operating expenses, the growth rate of the number of online users and websites in recent years is very amazing. If the number of websites in the Yahoo Advertising Alliance can increase by 10 times or even 100 times in the next few years, then our income will also increase exponentially." Tina Brown asked again, "Eric, if I'm the one who builds a website and successfully develops it to a certain scale, I'll definitely not join the Yahoo Advertising Alliance and choose to operate it on my own. It seems like I can get more income that way?" Eric pointed at the cross at the head of the long tail picture on the writing board and said, "The focus of the Yahoo Advertising Alliance's operation is not on these websites at the head of the long tail. What we want is the tail of the profits that are equal to the scale of the head." Tina Brown smiled awkwardly. She had neglected the rule that Eric had just explained. Eric did not mind and continued, "Moreover, the plan of investing $100 million to fund the development of a large number of small and medium-sized websites that I mentioned to you guys earlier can actually be classified as a part of the Yahoo Advertising Alliance. Any website that wants to get angel investment funds from Yahoo must join the Yahoo Advertising Alliance. It's still in the early stages of the internet industry. I think those small and medium-sized websites don't have many investors to choose from. We can take this opportunity to pull those websites with more potential into the Yahoo Advertising Alliance and promote them through Yahoo's huge portal channel effect. Then, at least in the next few years, the most powerful websites on the internet will mostly come from the Yahoo Advertising Alliance. Even if these websites choose to leave in the future, I think Yahoo has developed enough power to get rid of other profit channels." The so-called other profit channels were, of course, search engine services. Currently, Yahoo already had the basic functions of a search engine. However, due to the scale of the internet industry, it did not have enough potential. The main reason why Yahoo failed in the original space-time was that they blindly believed that the portal's position was unshakable and neglected the development potential of a search engine. Otherwise, with the huge resources that Yahoo had at that time, it would definitely not be replaced by Google. And now, of course, Eric would not make such a mistake. This small high-level meeting lasted until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. After Eric finished talking about the two future development plans of Yahoo, Chris, Ian Neal, Tina Brown, and others also spoke freely and expressed some of their suggestions. After the meeting, Eric and Chris left Yahoo's headquarters together, but Ian Neal and the other three still stayed in the conference room to discuss excitedly. Chris had just returned from Finland to Boston after attending a Nokia board meeting. He was very tired. When he returned to the hotel, he couldn't wait to get into the room to catch up on sleep. After today's meeting, Eric didn't have much to do in Boston. Some of the details of Yahoo's future development process could be discussed with everyone through email. If the meeting with John Chambers and Steve Keys tomorrow went well, Eric could return to Los Angeles. Compared to Chris, Eric still maintained a slightly excited state during the meeting. He didn't feel the slightest fatigue after attending a whole day of meetings. There was no sign of summer heat in Boston in May. The afternoon was warm and genial. After sending Chris back to the room to rest, Eric changed into casual clothes and walked out of the hotel downstairs. It had been a week since he came to Boston. Except for the party where he invited all the company's employees, Eric's activities had been limited to the Cambridge Hotel on Massachusetts Avenue and Yahoo's headquarters a few hundred meters away. At this time, he was almost done with everything. There was still some time in the afternoon, so Eric planned to walk around. This was a small habit after he went to every city. What's more, along the West Avenue that intersected with Massachusetts Avenue not far from the hotel, less than 2 kilometers to the west, across the Charles River, was the famous Harvard Business School. Although Eric now didn't admire the business school that produced a lot of political and business celebrities, he was still very curious. Eric had just walked out of the hotel when Carter Moan appeared at the right time and asked, "Boss, do you need a car?" Because he had been neglecting his personal image recently, Eric's chin had grown a light stubble at this time, which added a bit of mature temperament to his whole person. He took out light-colored sunglasses from his pocket and put them on. Coupled with his casual clothes at this time, Eric believed that there were not many people who could easily recognize him except for very familiar relatives and friends. "I'm going to the other side of the river for a walk. I don't need a car." Carter Moan nodded and watched Eric walk leisurely to the front of the street like the young students commonly seen on this street. Only then did he follow from a distance with another companion. Turning into West Avenue, although the name sounded like a commercial street, it was only a 2-lane asphalt road. Most of the sides of the road were red brick houses that triggered some of Eric's obsessive-compulsive disorder. The brownstone culture in Boston was very popular, and these seemingly shabby red brick buildings were usually affordable to the middle class and the rich with a good income. Middle and low-income people could still only live in cheap wooden houses. Walking along West Avenue for a few hundred meters, Eric saw an ATM next to a supermarket and realized that he didn't have money on him. He might need it later, so he walked over and took out his credit card to withdraw a few $100s. Walking out of the ATM, he saw a girl in a light blue coat holding 2 full convenience bags walking to a red Ford on the street. She carefully reached out to open the trunk. Eric took the initiative to walk over and say, "Hello, miss, do you need help?" "Thank you, you are really a warm-hearted person," the girl smiled and moved aside. Eric reached out to help her open the trunk, nodded to her, and continued to walk forward. The girl carefully put the daily necessities in the convenience bags, closed the trunk, and looked up to see Eric's figure walking forward. Only then did she remember the feeling of déjà vu when she noticed Eric's side profile. However, she had no clue where the feeling came from. In the end, she could only treat this feeling as a common psychological déjà vu. However, although he was wearing sunglasses, he was still a handsome guy. With such a thought in her mind, the girl quickly scolded herself for being a love-struck fool. Just as she was about to get in the car and leave, she remembered that she had forgotten to buy some things that her roommate asked her to help buy. She had to turn back to the supermarket again. Walking out of the supermarket again, the girl threw the bag in her hand into the back seat of the car and got into the Ford. When she took out the key, she unconsciously glanced in front of her. The figure was still in her field of vision. Inexplicably throbbing, the girl drove to Eric's side and slowed down the car. She pressed down the window and mustered up the courage to say to Eric, "I'm going to the soldier factory in front. Do you want a ride?" Eric, who was standing on the curb, leaned over slightly and waved to the girl sitting in the driver's seat of the Ford. He smiled and said, "Thank you, I'll be there after crossing the river." The girl in front of him looked to be the same age as him. She had long, soft, light brown hair, a fair face with light makeup, and an obvious scholarly aura. Eric himself wouldn't refuse such a beautiful encounter in a foreign land, but if he got into this beautiful woman's car, Carter Moan, who was following behind on foot, would definitely be shaken off. Mr. Bodyguard had once told him not to do anything that was out of their expectations for the sake of personal safety. He thought that the girl would leave after he refused, but the other party smiled and said to Eric, "Don't you know that the soldier factory is after crossing the river?" Eric froze for a moment and shook his head honestly. He had simply looked at the map and determined the location of Harvard Business School. He really didn't know where the soldier factory the girl was talking about was. He said, "I'm from Los Angeles. I just want to go to Harvard Business School to take a look." "Are you planning to apply for business school? Maybe I can take you around." The girl looked at Eric with sparkling eyes and continued to slow down the car. She said, "Let me introduce myself. I'm Melanie." Eric wasn't interested in casually making up a fake name, nor did he take the initiative to introduce himself. Listening to the girl's accent, he smiled and casually changed the topic. "Don't tell me you're from Georgia?" "Oh," Melanie asked in surprise. "How did you guess? Someone in your family likes to read Gone with the Wind?" Eric asked casually again. "Yeah, my dad. My name is Melanie Hamilton from Gone with the Wind. I didn't expect you to guess it just based on this." "That's great. Of course, it's impossible for me to guess this just based on your name," Eric said with a smile. "Most importantly, I can hear your Georgia accent. I have a Friend from Georgia. In fact, the topic about Gone with the Wind was indeed Eric's guess, but the rest was not a blind guess. Because among the women around him, Julia grew up in Georgia. Eric felt that the girl named Melanie in front of him was very similar to Julia in some pronunciation habits. After being reborn for a long time, Eric could easily distinguish the various accents of various places and people in the United States. Hee, Melanie patted the steering wheel gently and said with a smile, "I understand. You're imitating the joke of Conan Doyle and the Coachman. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.